The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and nobody in the Volkov house pretended it was welcome. It came with a red wax seal and a courier who kept his eyes down, which was the way couriers behaved when they carried messages from men of consequence. The seal belonged to a solicitor in Pskov, and the solicitor's name was well known enough that Irina Volkov, who received the letter at the door because she happened to be passing, stood in the hallway for a full minute before she moved another step. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and carried it into the kitchen, where her husband, Pavel, was drinking tea and reading yesterday's newspaper, and she set it on the table in front of him without a word. Pavel Volkov was a man who had spent his life managing the gap between what he had and what he owed. He was not dishonest, exactly. He was the kind of man who borrowed with good intentions and repaid with excuses, who genuinely believed that next season would be better, who had been saying next season for 20 years while the house around him got quieter and the creditors got louder. He had 3 daughters. The first 2 were married and gone to decent men, both of them, men who had not asked too many questions about the dowry. That had cost Pavel considerably. The 3rd daughter, the youngest, was named Maria, though nobody called her that. Everyone called her Masha. Masha was 19. Pavel read the letter, he set it down, he picked it up and read it again. The letter was an inquiry, a formal one. A gentleman by the name of Nikolai Brenev of Pskov, engaged in the management of 2 estates and a modest but growing timber concern, was seeking to make the acquaintance of a suitable young woman with a view toward marriage. He had been referred to the Volkov family by an intermediary, a cousin of Pavel's who had apparently been talking to people he should not have been talking to. The letter was proper and careful and said nothing impolite, but it said a great deal between its lines, and what it said between its lines was this. He had money, he was serious, and he wanted an answer. Pavel Volkov folded the letter again. He looked at his wife. Irina Volkov was a small woman who had been pretty when she was young and was now simply capable of stretching a meal, capable of managing a household on reduced means, capable of sitting in a room with difficult news and not letting her face show what she was thinking. She had raised 3 daughters and had opinions about all 3 of them. About Masha, her opinions were complicated. "She'll ruin it," Irina said. "She might not. She will open her mouth and ruin it." Pavel Volkov looked at his tea. "She is the only one left." This was the truth that neither of them liked to say out loud. The other 2 daughters were gone. Masha was what remained, and Masha was not easy. She had opinions about things that girls in her position were not supposed to have opinions about. She read books that were not appropriate. She argued. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of a girl who wanted attention. She argued quietly, patiently, with the kind of careful reasoning that was actually more unsettling than shouting, because you couldn't dismiss it and you couldn't walk away from it without feeling that you had lost something. Pavel Volkov loved his youngest daughter. He also found her exhausting. Both of these things were true at the same time. "We can manage it," he said. Irina looked at him. "The presentation," he said. "We manage the presentation." There was a pause. Irina understood what he meant. She did not immediately say anything, because she was turning it over in her mind the way she turned over all problems, practically, without sentiment. A man like Nikolai Brenev, coming from Pskov, coming with references, coming with land and timber, a man like that was not looking for a remarkable girl. Remarkable girls were difficult. Remarkable girls had ideas. What a man like that was looking for in Irina Volkov's experience was something quiet and manageable and undemanding, someone who would not require too much, someone who would keep a house and not cause complications. Masha was not that girl. But she could be dressed like that girl, for one afternoon, for one meeting. "The blue dress," Irina said. Pavel nodded. The blue dress was old. It had belonged to Masha's eldest sister, and it had been unflattering even when it was new, a plain, heavy thing that did nothing for its wearer's coloring. On Masha, who was dark-eyed and had a quality of alertness about her that made her seem somehow larger than she was, the dress would do a specific and useful job. It would make her look dull. It would make her look like the kind of girl a practical man might glance at and not feel the need to examine further. If he declined, the family had lost nothing. A man they had never met had looked at a girl he didn't want and gone home, and life continued as before. The debt continued too, of course, but that was a separate problem. If he accepted, well, if he accepted, Masha would be someone else's complicated daughter. She would be in Pskov, with her books and her quiet arguments, and she would be that man's responsibility, and the Volkov family would have the relief of a respectable marriage and whatever financial arrangement accompanied it. This was the plan. It was not a kind plan. Both Pavel and Irina Volkov knew it was not a kind plan. Neither of them said so out loud. Masha, at the time this conversation was happening, was in the back room that served as a library, though library was a generous word for what was really a collection of books on 2 shelves and a small desk that her father had meant to sell twice and hadn't managed to part with. She was reading. She did not know about the letter. She did not know about the plan. She was reading a book about agricultural reform that she had borrowed from the schoolteacher in the village, and she had a piece of paper on the desk where she was writing down things she disagreed with, because she disagreed with quite a lot of it, and she found it useful to write things down. She was, in other words, doing exactly the kind of thing that her mother had been worrying about. In Pskov on the same Tuesday, Nikolai Brenev was reviewing accounts. He did this every Tuesday morning, which was perhaps the most Nikolai thing about him, the fact that he had a specific morning for accounts and kept to it, regardless of the weather or his mood or any number of other factors that might have given a less disciplined man reason to postpone. The accounts were not in crisis. They were in the condition that his careful management had kept them in for the better part of a decade. Stable, productive, not spectacular but not fragile. He had made steady choices. He had not overextended. He had turned down 2 investments that would have been exciting and would have been wrong, and he had made 2 investments that were boring and had been right. And the net result was that he owned 2 productive estates and a timber concern that employed 40 men in winter and 60 in summer. He was 34 years old. He lived alone in a house that was larger than he needed. He had a housekeeper named Olga who had been with him since before his grief and had stayed through it without comment, which was the thing he valued most about her. She did not comment. She kept the house, she left food on the table, and when he was silent for days at a time, she matched his silence and went about her work, and that was the arrangement they had arrived at without ever discussing it. There was a portrait in the upstairs hall. He walked past it every morning and every evening. He did not stop in front of it. He had made a decision some years ago that stopping in front of it was not helpful, and he had been disciplined about that decision the way he was disciplined about accounts. He was not a man who indulged, but he was also not a man who pretended, and the portrait was there, and he knew it was there, and some mornings the knowledge of it was just another fact in the morning, and some mornings it was not. The woman in the portrait was named Vera. She had died in the spring of 1861, 7 weeks before a wedding that had been planned for 2 years. She had been 23. She had been the kind of person who made a room feel different when she entered it, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she paid attention. She paid attention to everything. She listened the way most people don't listen, which is to say she actually waited until you were done before she started forming her answer. Nikolai had met her when he was 21 and had known immediately, not in the dramatic way of stories, but in the quiet way of recognition, the way you recognize a word in a foreign language you didn't know you'd been learning. He had proposed in a reasonable amount of time. They had made plans. And then the fever had come in March, and by May she was gone, and the plans were not plans anymore. He had been 24 when she died. He was now 34. In between, there had been 10 years of work and accounts, and a house he kept in order and a portrait in the upstairs hall, and that was most of what there was to say. His mother had been saying for several years that he needed to marry again. She said it the way she said most things, which was repeatedly and without apology. She had provided names. She had arranged introductions. He had gone to a number of these introductions and had been polite and had come home and had gone back to his accounts, and the women had married other men, which was appropriate. The letter to the Volkov family had been his mother's idea. He had agreed to it in a moment of what he could only call exhaustion, not exhaustion with her, but exhaustion with himself, with the particular kind of tiredness that comes from spending too many winters in a well-ordered house with no one to argue with. He did not especially want to make the trip. He did not especially want to sit in a front room and drink tea with a family he didn't know and look at a girl who had been prepared for examination. He had done it before. It had the same quality every time, something staged about it, something formal that felt like the opposite of the thing it was supposed to be. But he had said yes, he had written the letter. The solicitor had sent it on his behalf, and the thing was now in motion, and Nikolai Brenev was not a man who put things in motion and then reversed them. He put his pen down, he looked at the accounts were fine. He looked out the window at the March snow, which was still coming down in the patient way of late winter snow, without urgency, as if it had all the time in the world. He thought about the trip. He thought about the front room and the tea and the family he didn't know. He thought about Vera, and then he was disciplined about that and stopped. He picked up his pen. The response came from the Volkov family within a week. It was warm and welcoming and a little too eager, and Nikolai noticed the eagerness but did not judge it. Families with daughters to place had reasons for eagerness. That was understandable. He wrote back with a proposed date and accepted the invitation to visit. He was not looking forward to it. He was also, he noticed, not entirely dreading it. That was a new thing. He didn't examine it too closely. Masha found out about Nikolai Brenev on a Thursday, when her mother came to find her in the back room and sat down across from her at the small desk with the expression she used for serious announcements. Masha knew this expression well. It had been used to tell her that her eldest sister was engaged, and that her second sister was engaged, and that the family was cutting expenses, and that the schoolteacher who lent her books had moved to another village. It was an expression of controlled delivery. It meant, "I'm going to tell you something and you are going to respond appropriately." "There is a gentleman from Pskov who wants to meet you," her mother said. Masha looked up from her book. "His name is Nikolai Brenev. He manages estates. He is 34. Masha said nothing. She was noting the fact that her mother had not said he is kind, or he is clever, or he is someone you might find interesting. Her mother had said he manages estates, which was the relevant information. "He will come on the 15th, her mother said. "We will receive him properly." "All right," Masha said. Her mother looked at her with the suspicious attention of someone who has been expecting an argument and hasn't got one. "You aren't going to say anything." "What would you like me to say?" "I would like you to understand that this is important, that you should." Her mother paused. She was reorganizing what she intended to say. "You will wear the blue dress." Masha knew the blue dress. She had grown up watching it be too large for her eldest sister and then too small and then passed from one daughter to another over the years. It had never been flattering to anyone. She understood with the same clarity she brought to everything exactly what the blue dress meant. Her mother wanted her to look unimpressive. There was a moment, just a moment, where something moved across Masha's face that was not quite hurt and not quite anger but was somewhere in between. Then it was gone. "All right," she said again. Her mother looked at her for another second, then got up and left. Masha watched her go. Then she turned back to her book, but she didn't read for a while. She sat and looked at the wall above the shelves where there was nothing interesting, and she thought about a man in Pskov who managed estates and was 34 years old and was coming on the 15th. She thought about the blue dress. She thought about what it meant that her family's plan for her was to be as unremarkable as possible, and then she decided, with the particular quietness that was her way of making decisions, that she was not going to be angry about it. She was going to pay attention instead. She was going to watch everything and form her own conclusions, and whatever those conclusions were, they would be hers, not anyone else's. She picked up her book. She found the line where she had stopped. She kept reading. The 15th came after a week of cold, clear weather that made the village roads hard and passable, which Irina Volkov took as a good sign because at least the journey would not be difficult and the man would not arrive in a bad mood from 3 hours of mud. She had spent the week in preparation. The front room had been cleaned with unusual attention. The tea service that was kept for good occasions had been brought out and washed. The best cloth was on the table. The food would be simple but excellent. Irina Volkov was a very good cook, which was one of the things that had helped her manage the various shortfalls of her marriage. Masha was dressed in the blue dress by mid-morning. She stood in her mother's room while her mother arranged her hair, and she looked at herself in the glass, and she looked like herself in an unflattering dress. That was the honest assessment. The dress was the wrong color for her. Her hair was pulled back too tightly. She looked plain, she looked manageable. She thought, so this is what they want him to see. Her mother was watching her in the glass with a focus that was almost tender, the focus of someone working hard at something they believed was necessary. Masha understood her mother. She had spent 19 years understanding her mother. Irina Volkov was not a cruel woman. She was a practical woman in a practical situation, doing what she believed she had to do, and the line between those two things was hard to see sometimes. "You look neat," her mother said. "Yes," Masha said. "You will let me do the talking?" "Yes." "If he asks you a question, answer it briefly. Don't, her mother paused, don't go on. By which she meant, don't argue, don't elaborate, don't let him see the thing inside you that makes people uncomfortable. Masha looked at herself in the glass one more time. Then she followed her mother out of the room and went downstairs to wait. Nikolai Brenev arrived at 2:30 in a carriage that was not ostentatious but was well maintained, which was more telling than something expensive would have been. A man with something to prove arrived in the best carriage he could afford. A man who was simply comfortable arrived in something clean and functional. Masha, watching from the window, noted this. She also noted that he was tall. She watched him hand his coat to the driver and walk toward the door, and she thought, he walks like someone who is not trying to arrive impressively. He walks like someone going somewhere he already decided to go. There was a difference. She had noticed this difference in people all her life. There were people who performed their arrivals and people who simply arrived, and something about the distinction had always seemed important to her. Her mother called from the hallway. Masha stepped back from the window and went to meet the man from Pskov. The front room felt smaller with him in it. That was the first thing Masha noticed, and she held on to it because it was a fact rather than an impression. The room was the same size it had always been: 4 chairs, the tea table, the window with the faded curtain, the icon in the corner. Nothing had changed. And yet with Nikolai Brenev standing in it, the dimensions felt compressed, not because he was physically overwhelming, but because he was present in a way that took up space without demanding it. He was not handsome in the way that makes you want to stop and stare. He was something more specific than that, a face that had been through some weather, a jaw that was not soft, dark hair going gray at the temples earlier than it should have at 34. His eyes were direct, not aggressive, just direct, the way eyes are when the person behind them is actually looking rather than simply facing forward. He shook her father's hand. He was introduced to her mother, who was warm and welcoming in the careful way she'd rehearsed. Then he turned to Masha. "Miss Volkov," he said. "Mr. Brenev," she said. That was all for that first moment. Her mother gestured everyone toward the chairs, and the tea was brought, and the performance began, the one her family had planned, the one Masha was supposed to be a particular kind of participant in. Her father talked about the land. Her mother talked about the family, about the 2 older daughters who were well settled, about the village, about the mild winter. Nikolai Brenev listened with the attention of someone who actually cared what was being said, which was either genuine or very well practiced. Masha sat with her hands in her lap as instructed, and kept her eyes at the middle distance as instructed, and said nothing. She was also watching him. She watched the way he held his tea glass steadily, without fidgeting. She watched the way he answered her father's questions, directly, without the particular inflation that men used when they wanted to seem more significant than they were. He spoke about his estates the way someone might speak about a garden they tended, with interest but not pride. He said the timber concern had done well this year, and then he said also that it had been difficult to manage the agreements with the local woodcutters, and that he was still working that out, and he said this as easily as the first part, as if admitting difficulty was nothing remarkable. That caught her attention. Men who came to these arrangements, and Masha had been present at 2 when her sisters were the ones in the chairs, did not usually admit difficulty. They presented themselves as finished products, competent, settled, complete, as if marriage were something that would be fitted to them rather than something that would change them. He had said the thing about the woodcutters and then moved on, and nobody had commented, and the conversation continued, and Masha was thinking about it. Her mother was talking about the summer, something about the garden, and Nikolai Brenev was listening politely, and then, in the middle of a sentence, not rudely, not dismissively, but with a naturalness that was somehow startling, he looked at Masha. "You haven't been outside much today," he said. The sentence was so unexpected that her mother stopped speaking mid-word. Masha looked at him directly, which she had been deliberately not doing. "I was inside this morning," she said. "Reading." There was a pause. Her mother looked at Masha with the particular tension of someone watching a glass near an edge. Her father cleared his throat. "A little," Masha said. "What are you reading?" Her mother laughed, the light, redirecting laugh of a hostess managing a conversation that had gone somewhere unplanned. "She reads all sorts of things. She has always been fond of. She reads quite broadly. More tea, Mr. Brenev." Nikolai Brenev looked at Irina Volkov pleasantly. He accepted more tea. He turned back to Masha. "What are you reading?" he said again. Not aggressive, not testing, genuinely asking. Masha looked at him. She looked at her mother, whose expression said with absolute clarity, "Give a harmless answer, give a small answer, do not say the thing you are about to say." She said the thing she was about to say. "It's a commentary on the agricultural reforms," she said, "the ones from 1861. The author argues that the new arrangement of peasant holdings is more economically efficient, but the evidence he uses to support this is not very sound. He is comparing estate yields from different regions without accounting for soil quality differences, which makes the comparison fairly useless." Silence. Her father was looking at the table. Her mother had the expression of someone who has witnessed a small disaster and is calculating the cost. Nikolai Brenev was not doing either of those things. He had gone still, not the stillness of surprise, but the stillness of someone who has just heard something that requires their full attention. He looked at Masha the way she had watched him look at nothing else in the room, actually looking. "Which edition?" he said. Masha blinked. "Pardon." "The commentary. Which edition are you reading? Ostrovsky published 3, and the methodology critique in the first edition is different from the third." Her mother set down her tea glass. Her father looked up from the table. Masha said, "The second. I haven't been able to find the third." "The third is better argued," Nikolai said. "He addresses most of the soil problem in the appendix, though he still doesn't solve it. He admits this, which is honest of him." Masha looked at him. She said, "He admits it in a footnote, quite a small footnote." Something changed in Nikolai Brenev's face. It was not a smile exactly, not yet, but it was the movement that happens before a smile, the one that comes from the inside. "Yes," he said, "quite a small one." Her mother said brightly and firmly, "Would anyone like something to eat? I have something in the kitchen, excuse me one moment," and she was gone, taking her husband with a look that he obeyed immediately. And then Masha and Nikolai Brenev were alone in the front room, which was something that had not been planned and was not supposed to happen, and which neither of them remarked upon. Masha set down her tea glass. Nikolai sat back slightly in his chair, not relaxing, adjusting. "Your mother didn't want you to answer that question," he said. "No," Masha agreed. "But you answered it anyway. You asked it twice." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cart passed on the road and the window trembled slightly. "Do you often do that?" he said. "Answer questions that you've been told not to answer?" Masha considered this honestly. "I try to be obedient," she said. "I am not always successful." "That's a very careful answer." "Thank you." He looked at her with the expression of someone recalculating something. She let him look. She had learned over the years that the best thing to do when people were recalculating you was to sit still and let them finish. "My mother told me," she said after a moment, "that I should be quiet today. She told me that if you asked me a question, I should answer briefly and not go on." Nikolai said nothing. "I am telling you this," Masha said, "because I think you should know the conditions under which you are meeting me." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "That is the most unusual thing anyone has said to me in a social visit." "I imagine it is. Why did you tell me?" Masha looked at the window. The cart had gone. The road was quiet again. "Because," she said, and then she paused because she was finding the precise version of the thing she wanted to say, the way she always did, and it took a moment. "Because if you're going to form an opinion of me, I would prefer it was an accurate one." "Either way." By either way, she meant whether he decided to pursue this or not, whether the afternoon ended in an offer or in a polite departure. Either way, she would rather be seen clearly. Nikolai Brenev looked at her, then he looked at the door through which her mother had disappeared, then he looked back. He did not say anything for a moment. She did not fill the silence. Then he said, "Are there other books you haven't been able to find?" And something in Masha, which had been very carefully still all morning, exhaled. "Several," she said. "There is a reasonable library in Pskov," he said, "not large but reasonably stocked." He did not look away when he said it. He said it plainly as a statement of fact, and it was not an invitation exactly, not a declaration, not a thing anyone could point to and say, "Here, this is the moment." It was just a sentence about books. And Masha filed it where she filed all information carefully without embellishment and said, "That's useful to know." Her mother came back with a plate of small cakes. Her father followed. The formal atmosphere was restored or attempted to be. The conversation returned to safe subjects: the road from Pskov, the weather expected for the month, the affairs of an aunt of Pavel Volkov's who had recently moved to a larger house. But something was different now, and all four people in the room knew it, though only two of them knew exactly what. Masha ate one of the small cakes and looked at the window. Nikolai Brenev drank his tea and looked at his hands and occasionally glanced at the door to the back of the house, as if he could see, through the walls, the room with the shelves and the small desk. The visit was supposed to last an hour. It lasted 2.5. This was mostly because Nikolai asked Pavel Volkov about his land. The family had a small agricultural plot that was managed by a tenant, and Pavel, grateful for a subject he understood and was not anxious about, expanded considerably. He talked about the land with the enthusiasm of a man describing something he loved and was no longer able to properly manage. Nikolai listened and asked real questions, not polite questions, and Pavel answered them, and the conversation went on. Masha watched this. She watched Nikolai listen to her father with the same quality of attention he'd brought to the book discussion, actual attention, not patience. There was a difference between listening because you are waiting for your turn and listening because you want to know what the other person thinks. She had been noticing this difference in people all her life, the same way she noticed the difference between arrivals. When the visit finally ended and the coats were brought and the farewells were said in the doorway, Nikolai Brenev shook Pavel's hand and thanked Irina for the tea and the cakes, and then turned briefly to Masha and said, "Thank you for telling me." Just that, not "it was a pleasure" or "I look forward to seeing you again." "Thank you for telling me," which referred precisely to the thing she had told him and nothing else. "Of course," Masha said. He went out to the carriage. They watched him from the doorway, all three of them, though Masha stepped back slightly so she was watching from a little behind her parents. The driver came down from his seat. There was a conversation, brief, quiet, she couldn't hear what was said. The driver looked toward the house once, then nodded, then climbed back up. The carriage did not move. Nikolai Brenev walked back toward the house. Her mother made a sound. He stopped at the gate, not coming further, and looked at Pavel. "Is there an inn in the village?" he said. Pavel said there was, a small one on the main road, kept by a man called Gregory. "I think I will stay for a few days," Nikolai said. He said it simply, without explanation, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "If that is agreeable." He looked at Pavel when he said it. He did not look at Masha. But Masha, standing just behind her parents, understood completely what was happening, and she was careful to keep her face at its usual stillness. "Of course," Pavel said, and his voice had a quality in it that Masha recognized, the voice of a man who has just received something he was not sure he deserved. "I'll call again tomorrow if I may," Nikolai said. To continue the conversation about the land, I had a few more questions. "Any time," Pavel said. Nikolai nodded and turned and walked back to the carriage, and the driver took him to the inn in the village. The door closed. Irina Volkov stood in the hall with her hands pressed together and looked at nothing. Pavel Volkov said slowly he liked her. "He liked something," Irina said. Her voice was very careful. "He stayed." Irina was quiet. Masha had already turned and was walking back toward the room with the shelves. She heard her parents' voices continuing behind her, low, wondering, not quite believing. She went to her desk. She sat down. She looked at the open book, at the line where she had stopped, at the margin notes she had made in her small, neat hand. She did not read. She sat with her hands on the desk and thought about a man who had asked twice what she was reading, who had named the edition, who had said the footnote was quite a small one. She thought about a library in Pskov. She thought about the carriage, going to the inn, not going home. She picked up her pen. She did not write anything, not immediately. She just held it and sat, and outside the window the last of the afternoon light was going, and the village was quiet, and somewhere on the main road, in a small inn kept by a man named Gregory, Nikolai Brenev was likely sitting with a lamp and a book that he was probably arguing with. She put the pen down. She thought we would have had more to say. Then she thought we will. She opened the book to where she had stopped. This time she read. The night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes sounds carry farther than they should, and if she had gone to the window she might have seen the lamplight in the upper window of Gregory's inn, where it stayed on until nearly midnight, which was later than she normally stayed up herself, though she didn't know that and wouldn't know it for a long time. Her mother came to her door once, later in the evening, and stood in the frame without speaking for a moment. Masha looked up. "He is a careful man," her mother said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was an observation, and underneath it was something Masha recognized as the closest her mother came to an apology. Not for the dress, not for the instructions, not for any specific thing, but for the general shape of the situation, for the fact that Masha had been prepared to fail and had done something else instead. "Yes," Masha said. Her mother looked at her a moment longer, then she said, "Don't stay up too late," and went away. Masha turned a page. The next morning Masha woke early, before anyone else in the house. She did this often. It was one of her habits, the early morning, when the house was still, and there was no one to manage. She came down to the kitchen and made tea and sat by the window and looked at the garden, which was still brown and stubborn from winter, and she thought. She was thinking about the difference between what she had expected from yesterday and what had actually happened. She was not someone who confused these two things easily. She had been told, in various ways throughout her life, that expectations were dangerous, not by anyone who used that word exactly, but by the general lesson of watching her family arrange and manage and plan, and seeing how often the arrangements went somewhere other than planned. She had developed a habit because of this of expecting very little, not in a sad way, in a useful way. Expecting very little meant that you could see what was actually in front of you, instead of comparing it to what you'd hoped for. What was in front of her now was a fact. A man had stayed. He had sent the carriage home and stayed. She was not naive about what this might mean. She also knew that one afternoon's conversation about a book, however unexpected and however welcome, was not the same as understanding a person. She knew almost nothing about Nikolai Brenev. She knew he had money and land and a timber concern, and that he read Ostrovsky, and that he asked questions twice when he wanted an answer. That was not very much. But it was more than she'd had yesterday morning. She drank her tea and watched the garden and thought about what she wanted to know. This was the question she always started with when she was trying to understand something. What do I actually want to know? Not what she was supposed to want to know, not what was relevant to other people's plans, but what she, Masha Volkov, was actually curious about. It was a useful starting place. It produced better questions. What she wanted to know about Nikolai Brenev was why he had stayed. Not the polite version of this, not the version where a man saw a suitable girl and was encouraged and decided to extend his visit in the normal way of courtship. She understood that version, but it sat next to another question that felt more real. What had specifically made him stay? Was it the argument about the book, the quality of it, the unexpectedness of it? Was it something about her family that interested him, the land or her father's knowledge? Was it something smaller, something she couldn't identify? She finished her tea and washed the glass and went to the back room. She thought about what he had said. "Thank you for telling me," the plainness of it. He had not said it warmly or with great feeling. He had said it the way you say something when you mean exactly the thing and nothing extra. She had spent 19 years in a house where most things were said with layers, layers of politeness, layers of management, layers of meaning that sat underneath the surface meaning and often contradicted it. She was very good at hearing the layers. When someone said something and meant exactly that thing, she noticed it. She sat at her desk and opened the book, but she looked at the wall instead. She was 20 days from her birthday. She would be 20 on the 5th of April. Her sisters had both been married by 22, both to men selected in the same careful process, both in the same front room, and both of them were, as far as Masha could tell, reasonably settled. Not unhappy, not dramatically happy either. Settled. She had always thought that settled was a smaller thing than it was supposed to be. She looked at the wall and thought about Piskov. He came the next day, as he said he would. Not early, mid-morning, which was considerate. The kind of hour that says, I am not trying to catch you unprepared, but I am also not postponing this until afternoon. Masha was in the back room when she heard the knock, and she stayed where she was and let her mother answer it, and she listened to the voices in the hall, her mother's managed warmth, his even reply, and she thought, he has a voice that doesn't change depending on who he's talking to. Most people had two voices, a formal one and a familiar one. He seemed to have only one. Her father was out. He had gone to see a neighbor about a fence dispute that had been ongoing for 3 years, and which her father addressed periodically when he couldn't avoid it. Her mother received Nikolai alone, and then came to find Masha, and stood in the doorway of the back room looking at her with the expression she used when she was making a decision about which rule to bend. He has asked if he might walk in the garden, her mother said. With you, I would come as well. Masha looked up from her book. All right. He says he wants to ask you about the land, your father's plot. All right. Her mother looked at her a moment longer. You'll take your coat, it's cold. Masha put on her coat. The garden in March was not a beautiful garden. It was honest, which was a different thing, the honest garden of early spring, all mud and brown stems and the first suggestions of things that might be green later, in a season that had not arrived yet. Masha had always liked it at this time of year. Most people only liked the garden in summer, which seemed to her like only appreciating a story when it was finished. Nikolai Brenev stood on the path with his hands in his coat and looked at it without performing appreciation. You mentioned the soil quality issue yesterday, he said. In the book, Masha said. Yes, does it apply here, to your father's plot? She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the far end of the garden toward the field that could be seen beyond the wooden fence. I think so, she said. The soil here is heavy, good for some crops and bad for others. The tenant grows the same rotation my grandfather did, which isn't wrong, but it's not optimized for what the land actually produces well. Nikolai was quiet for a moment. Her mother, 2 steps behind them, was watching both of them with the careful attention of someone following a conversation in a language they mostly understood. What would you grow? He said. Flax, possibly. The moisture content is right in the lower field, rye for the upper. The tenant grows wheat in the upper field because wheat is what people have always grown there, but the yield is modest and the quality is not reliable. Nikolai turned and looked at her. She had the sense, again, that he was registering something, adjusting for something he hadn't expected. You've looked at the yield records, he said. My father keeps them in a ledger. He doesn't look at them very often. She said this without criticism, simply as fact. But they're there. And you've read them. I read what's available, she said. There isn't always a great deal. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the front room, the same quality of attention, steady, not unkind, but also not softened with politeness. You're wasted here, he said. It was the most direct thing anyone had said to her in her life. She took a breath. Her mother said behind them, Masha is very capable. Yes, Nikolai said to her mother, and then back to Masha. What I mean is, you have a mind that needs something to do, and here there isn't enough for it to do. Masha looked at the brown garden. I manage, she said. I know you do, he said. That's my point. The walk lasted an hour. Her mother stayed 2 steps behind them the entire time, close enough for propriety and far enough for something like privacy, which was a delicate balance that Masha recognized her mother had chosen deliberately. Whatever Irina Volkov had planned 2 days ago, she was now managing a different situation, and she was managing it with the same practical attention she brought to everything. They talked about the land for the first half of the walk, and then the conversation shifted, not with any signal, just the natural way that conversations shift when the people in them are interested in more than one thing. He asked her how long she had been reading economic theory, and she said since she was about 16, when the schoolteacher had lent her a history of trade that had a long section on agricultural economics, and she had found the logic of it interesting in the same way she found mathematics interesting. It had structure, it rewarded careful reading, it punished vague thinking. Most people don't find it interesting, she said. Most people find the outcome interesting, Nikolai said. Whether the farm makes money, whether the estate stays solvent, very few people are interested in why the numbers behave as they do. Are you? Very much, he said. It was simply said. I find it the most interesting kind of question. The numbers are the surface. The reasons are the real thing. Masha looked at the fence at the far end of the garden. Yes, she said. One word, but it was the kind of yes that contains a conversation, the kind that says, yes, and I have been thinking exactly this, and I have never had anyone to say it to. He did not press it. He said nothing for a moment, and they walked, and her mother's footsteps were steady and careful behind them. Tell me about the timber concern, she said. He told her about how he had inherited the concern from a distant uncle who had mismanaged it for a decade, and how the first 3 years had been mostly identifying and correcting the damage, and how the 4th year he had started to get somewhere, and how the 5th year the agreement with the local woodcutters had gone wrong in a way that had cost him considerably, and how he was still working through the effects of that. What went wrong, she said. I trusted a verbal agreement, he said. I shouldn't have. The terms were clear in my mind and not clear in theirs, which was my fault for not making a written record. When the terms came into dispute, there was nothing to refer to. Masha said, "Did you know at the time that it was a mistake?" He thought about this. She noticed that he thought about it honestly, that he actually considered the question before answering, rather than giving the answer that made him look better. "I suspected it might be," he said. "I chose not to act on the suspicion because the relationship with the woodcutters was good and I didn't want to seem as if I didn't trust them. And now I have written records for everything," he said. "And the relationship with the woodcutters is actually better, not worse, because clarity turned out to be what they wanted too. They hadn't been sure of the terms either." Masha thought about this. "So the thing you were afraid of doing, making it formal, was the thing that actually helped?" "Yes," he said. She said, "I have found that often." They walked back toward the house. The sun had moved and the garden looked different now, lighter, the brown things sharper, the first suggestions of green slightly more visible. Her mother was walking a little behind them and looking at the ground ahead of her feet with the focus of someone who is thinking very hard. At the door there was the same small ceremony as yesterday, the thanks, the farewell, the turning to leave. But this time he paused a moment before he turned. "I would like to come again tomorrow," he said, "if you'd have me." He said it to both of them, to Masha and to her mother, which was proper, but he was looking at Masha. "Yes," her mother said. Masha said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He came again the next day, and the day after that. By the third walk, her mother had fallen back far enough that Masha and Nikolai Brenev were effectively in a private conversation, which was not strictly proper, and which her mother was allowing anyway, and which said something important about what Irina Volkov had decided she believed about this man. By the third walk they were arguing. Not badly, not in the way of anger or disagreement for its own sake. They were arguing about the Ostrovsky book, which Masha had finished, and which Nikolai had apparently read 3 times, and in which they had, it turned out, a significant disagreement about the second chapter's central claim. Masha thought Ostrovsky's logic was sound, but his evidence was selectively chosen. Nikolai thought his evidence was representative, but his conclusion overreached. These were not the same objection, and they were not reconcilable, and they had each been developing their position with increasing precision for the better part of an hour. "You're reading the data he chose to include," Masha said, "but you're not asking why he chose that data." "He chose the available data," Nikolai said. "You're suggesting he deliberately excluded inconvenient cases, but there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence he was thorough either. He cites 18 regions. There are 43 agricultural regions in the territories he's discussing. He doesn't mention the other 25. Nikolai was quiet, he was thinking. She could see him actually thinking, not formulating a counter-argument, actually thinking. "That's fair," he said. She blinked. "I hadn't thought about the regional count," he said. "That's a real gap in his methodology." She looked at him. She had said this kind of thing to people before: her father, the schoolteacher, occasionally her sisters, and the response was usually one of 2 things. Either the person acknowledged what she said in the way you acknowledge something you don't really care about, or they got a little bit defensive, the way people did when they felt that being right about one thing was being told they were wrong about themselves. He had just thought about it and said it was fair. She looked at the fence. She looked at the winter-brown grass. She said he may have had good reasons for which regions he chose. The data from the Northern Territories was often unreliable in that period. "That's true," Nikolai said. "He should have said so." "Yes," she said, "but he didn't, and you can't tell from reading it whether his choice was careless or considered." "So we're both partially right," he said. "Yes," she said, "I find that usually the case." There was a pause. Her mother, far behind them, was looking at a stand of bare branches near the garden wall with more attention than bare branches usually warranted. Masha and Nikolai kept walking. "I have 3 copies of the 3rd edition," Nikolai said, "if you'd like one." Masha turned to look at him. He was looking forward at the path. "3 copies seems excessive," she said. "I bought 2 by accident," he said, "from different booksellers on 2 different trips to the city, and then a 3rd came in a lot of books from an estate sale." He paused. "I notice I'm defending myself." "You don't need to," she said. "No," he agreed. I have 3 copies, you may have one. She thought about this. She thought about what it meant, whether it was a thing to read carefully, whether it was a thing to keep simple. She decided to keep it simple. Thank you, she said. On the evening of the 3rd day, Masha sat at her desk and did not open a book. She sat with her hands flat on the surface of the desk and thought about what was happening. She was not a girl who made decisions lightly. She was also not a girl who made them slowly when the information was clear. She had spent 3 afternoons with a man who had asked real questions and listened to real answers and said that's fair when she pointed out something he'd missed, and who had 3 copies of a book he hadn't meant to buy 3 of, and who had a library in Pskov that was, by his account, reasonably stocked. She was not going to pretend she didn't know what she thought. What she thought was, this is the most interesting person I have talked to in years. What she also thought was, I know almost nothing about him. 3 afternoons of garden walks and book arguments was not nothing, but it was also not a life, and a life was what was being discussed implicitly under all of it. She thought about the portrait in the upstairs hall. She knew about it because her cousin, who had connections in Pskov, had mentioned it once, mentioned a man named Brenev who had never married, who kept a portrait in the hall, who was known to be serious and private and financially sound. Her cousin had mentioned it as a piece of gossip, not as a recommendation. Masha had filed it where she filed all information. She thought, there is a woman in that portrait, and whatever happened to her is still in that house. She thought about what it would mean to go into a house with a grief already living in it. She thought about this for a long time, and she came to no conclusion, because it was not a question that could be concluded at a desk in a brown March garden with only 3 afternoons of evidence. She opened her book. She read until the lamp burned low, and then she went to bed, and she lay in the dark and thought about a library in Pskov, and a man who said that's fair, and a portrait she had never seen. Her father was at breakfast the next morning when she came down, which was unusual. Pavel Volkov was not normally an early riser. He was sitting with his tea and not reading the paper, which was also unusual, and when she came in he looked up with the expression of a man who has been waiting for someone to come so he can begin a conversation he has prepared. Masha sat down. She poured her own tea. He has spoken to me, her father said. She looked at him. Brenev, yesterday evening. He came here, I was back by then, and he asked to speak with me privately. Masha was quiet. He asked, her father said, about you, not about the family, not about arrangements, about you specifically. He asked me to tell him what you were like, what you thought about, whether you were happy here. This was so far from what she expected him to say that she set down her tea glass. Whether I was happy here, she repeated. Yes, her father looked at the table. Something had changed in his face. It was a softer thing than she usually saw there. I told him you were, he paused. I told him you were remarkable. I told him you were too smart for the life that was available to you here, and that I had always known it and had not known what to do about it. The kitchen was very quiet. You said that, Masha said. Yes. She looked at her father. She had loved him all her life with the particular love of a child who can see both the best and the worst of a parent, who sees the debt and the delayed plan and the good intentions and the genuine affection all at once. He was not a strong man. He had not made strong choices, but he was not a dishonest man either, and he had just told her something that cost him something to say, something that admitted more than he usually admitted. What did he say? She said. Her father looked up. He said, thank you. She looked at the window. The garden was there, still brown, unchanged. And then, she said, and then he asked my permission to ask you directly, before anything formal. He wanted to ask you. Her father's voice was careful. He said he wanted to know your answer independently, before the arrangements. Masha held her tea glass. It was warm. She thought, he wants to know what I think. Not what my family thinks, not what the arrangement produces, what I specifically think. The thing she had been turning over in her mind for 3 nights, the question about the portrait, about the grief in a house she hadn't seen, about whether she was walking into something she understood or something she was only beginning to understand, all of it was still there, all of it still mattered. But underneath it was something simple that she had not let herself look at directly until now. She wanted to know him better. She wanted to read the books in that library. She wanted to argue about Ostrovsky in a room that had space in it. She wanted someone to say that's fair and mean it. She looked at her father. He was watching her with an expression she recognized as love in his particular form, worried and genuine, and a little bit helpless. "Tell him I would be glad to speak with him," she said. Her father nodded. He seemed to be working hard to keep his face still. He nodded again and picked up his tea glass and said, "He'll come this afternoon." Masha drank her tea. She looked at the brown garden. She thought about what she would say when he came, and she thought about it carefully, and by the time she was finished with her tea, she had a reasonable sense of what she wanted to ask, which was more important to her than any answer she might give. She went to the back room and read until noon. He came at 2 o'clock. He and Masha sat in the front room. Her mother and father absented themselves, which was not usual and which cost her mother something visible, and she waited until the tea was poured and the silence was settled before she said anything. Then she said, "My father told me that you wanted to speak with me directly." "Yes," he said. "Before any formal discussion." "Yes." She looked at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, the thinking moment, the real one, not the polite pause. "Because," he said, "I have sat in enough of these arrangements to know that formal discussions produce formal answers, and I'm not interested in formal answers." He paused. "I'm interested in what you actually think." "About what?" "About this," he said. "About me, about what is being proposed." She looked at the window. The garden was visible from the front room too, from a different angle. She thought about what she actually thought and she said it, which was the only thing she knew how to do. "I think you are the most interesting person I have spoken to in a long time," she said. "I think 3 afternoons is not enough to know a person. I think there is something in your house in Pskov that you carry with you, and I don't know what it is, and that uncertainty matters to me." She looked back at him. "I think that if I went to Pskov I would like the library. I am less certain about everything else." He looked at her for a long time. "Her name was Vera," he said. "She died in 1861 before we could marry. The portrait is in the upstairs hall and I have not taken it down." It was the most direct thing she had ever heard from anyone. "I know," she said gently. "My cousin mentioned it." He nodded. He looked at his hands. "I am not going to tell you it doesn't matter anymore. It would not be honest." "No," she said. "I didn't expect you to." "What I can tell you," he said, "is that it is settled, not gone settled. There is a difference." She thought about this. She thought about grief that was settled and what that meant, and whether there was room beside it, and whether she was the kind of person who needed a great deal of room or not very much. "Yes," she said, "there is a difference." Outside the window the garden was brown and patient and utterly still, and the March afternoon was cold and clear, and somewhere on the main road a cart was going somewhere with something ordinary. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "The morning after you arrived, when you sent your carriage back and stayed, what specifically made you do that?" He was quiet. He looked at the window. He looked at his hands. He looked at her. "You told me," he said, "that you wanted me to see you accurately." Either way, he paused. I had not until that moment met anyone who said that. She sat with this. "It seemed," he said, "worth staying for." The afternoon light moved across the floor of the front room. Outside, nothing changed. Inside, something did. Word moved through the village before the week was out. Villages are small and careful and they talk, and a carriage from Pskov sitting at Gregory's Inn for 4 days while its owner took daily walks with the youngest Volkov girl was not something that went unnoticed. By the 3rd day, every neighbor within a reasonable distance had a theory. The theories ranged from cautious optimism. She is the most capable of the 3 daughters. Someone would recognize that eventually, to something more complicated, the particular village interest that is not quite gossip and not quite concern but sits between them. Masha knew she was being observed. She had grown up being observed. It was one of the conditions of life in a small place, the sense of always being in a landscape where you were visible, where your choices were part of a collective story that everyone read without being asked. She had learned to ignore the observation without ignoring the fact of it, which was a useful distinction. She was not, however, prepared for her cousin Helena. Helena arrived on the 4th afternoon, the day after Masha and Nikolai had their private conversation in the front room, in the way Helena always arrived, without announcement, at a time that was slightly inconvenient, carrying cake and news in equal measure. Helena was 26 and married and brisk, and she sat down in the kitchen without being invited and put the cake on the table, and looked at Masha with the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something for several days. "Tell me everything," Helena said. "There is nothing to tell," Masha said, which was not true. "He stayed 4 days. He had questions about the land." Helena looked at her with the specific patience of a cousin who has known you since childhood and knows exactly when you are being deliberately unhelpful. "Masha, what do you want me to say?" "I want you to say what you think of him." Masha looked at the cake. Helena made a very good cake. She was going to eat a piece of it no matter what followed. "I think he is serious," she said. Helena waited. "And fair," Masha said. "He is fair. He listens and then adjusts, which is not common." She paused. "He has a very good library." Helena stared at her. "He has a very good library," she said slowly. "That matters," Masha said. "To me it matters." Helena stood up and cut the cake and put a piece in front of Masha and sat down and said, "My husband has no library at all and I have made do. What I'm asking is whether you—" She stopped. She tried again. Do you like him, Masha, as a person, as someone to spend a life with?" Masha ate a piece of cake. It was a good cake. She thought about the question, which deserved a real answer. "I don't know him well enough to know whether I like him enough for a life," she said. "I have known him 4 days, but I have found more to say to him in 4 days than I have found to say to most people in years." She looked at Helena. "That seems like it means something." Helena was quiet. She looked at her cousin, really looked, the way family looks at you when they have known you long enough to see both what you are now and what you were when you were small. "He's been hurt before," she said. "I know. Vera Sorokina, she was something. I never met her, but people who did say she was the kind of person you only meet once." Helena was careful with this. She was not a careless person. "He took a long time to come back to any kind of life after she died." "I know that too," Masha said. "And you're not worried?" Masha said. "Of course I'm worried, but being worried about something and deciding not to do it are different things." She looked at her cake. "He told me her name. He told me the portrait was there. He didn't try to smooth it over." Helena looked at her for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Good." "Yes," Masha said, "I thought so too." They ate cake for a while. Outside the window, a neighbor's dog was making a fuss about something and then stopped. The kitchen was warm. Helena refilled both their tea glasses without asking. "Your mother is frightened," Helena said after a while. "I know. She thought he'd leave. She planned for him to leave." "Yes," Masha said. "And now that he hasn't." "She is managing," Masha said. "She is very good at managing." Helena looked at her. "Are you angry with her for the dress, for the instructions?" Masha considered this honestly. She had been considering it off and on for 4 days, turning it over in the quiet parts of mornings and evenings. She found that anger was too simple a thing for what she felt. It was more like she looked at it, the same way she looked at any complex thing, and what she saw was her mother in a difficult position doing what she believed she had to do, and underneath that the specific pain of being the daughter whose family had tried to erase her so that a stranger would send her home. "I think," she said slowly, "that I understand why she did it, and I think understanding why someone does something is not the same as finding it acceptable. Both of those things can be true at the same time." Helena nodded. She had the sense to leave it there. Nikolai Brenev came on the 5th afternoon, which was the last day he had said he would stay. He had been clear about this 5 days, and then he had to return to Pskov, to the accounts and the timber concern and the estates. He came to the house in the middle of the afternoon and was received by the whole family this time, all 4 of them in the front room, with the tea service and the good cloth. The conversation was formal. It was supposed to be formal. Pavel Volkov talked about expectations, about the family, about what they hoped for in a good arrangement. Nikolai listened and responded correctly and appropriately and said all the right things about his intentions and his circumstances. Masha sat and watched him be formal and thought about how different he was when he was being formal. Not worse, not dishonest, just compressed, like a person who knows how to fit themselves into a required space and does it without complaint. Then her father asked if there was anything else he wished to discuss, and Nikolai looked at Masha and said, "With your permission, I would like to say something directly to your daughter." Her parents both looked at her and then at Nikolai. "Of course," Pavel said. "Miss Volkov," Nikolai said. He was not, she noticed, performing this. His voice was the same as it was in the garden. I have spent 5 days here and I have found them considerably more worth my time than I expected. I would like to know if you would consider coming to Pskov. Not immediately. There would need to be proper arrangements and proper time, but I wanted to ask you here now whether the idea is something you could consider. He was asking her, not her parents, her. In the front room, in front of her parents, he was directing the question to her. She felt her mother shift in her chair, the smallest movement, the tiniest intake of breath. Masha looked at Nikolai Brenev. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know. She thought about the library. She thought about the portrait in the hall and what it meant to go toward a grief rather than around it. She thought about 4 days of garden walks and book arguments and the way he said that's fair and meant it every time. She said, yes, I could consider it. It was not a yes. She was careful about that. It was a yes to considering, which was honest. She was genuinely willing to consider it, but she would not say more than that in a room where the pressure to say more was considerable. Nikolai nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. She could see him understand it. I will write from Pskov, he said, if that is acceptable. Yes, her father said. After he left, the house was very still for a long time. Irina Volkov sat in the front room with her hands in her lap, and the empty tea glasses on the table, and the look of someone who has watched a situation they thought they controlled become something they no longer controlled, and who is in the process of deciding whether this is terrible or not. Pavel Volkov said, he is a good man. Irina said nothing. Better than I expected, Pavel said. Irina said he asked her. Yes. He asked her directly. Yes. Irina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very quietly and not to anyone in particular, she would have said no to anyone who didn't. Pavel looked at his wife. He was silent for a moment and then he said, yes, I suppose she would have. Masha in the back room heard none of this. She was at her desk and she was writing, but not in her usual manner, not in the small, neat hand she used for notes and disagreements. She was writing a letter, though she did not know yet who it was to exactly or what it would say. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote the first line and then stopped and looked at it and crossed it out. She tried again. She wrote, I am writing this because I want to remember what I thought before I knew how things would turn out. She stopped, she looked at the sentence. It was the most honest thing she could say, and it was also the most frightening, the acknowledgement that she was at the beginning of something and did not know its shape. She left it there. She put the pen down. She looked at the shelves, at the books arranged in their usual order, at the book on agricultural reform with its margin notes in her small, neat hand. She thought, in Pskov, there is a 3rd edition of the Ostrovsky, and I have never read it. Then she thought, there is also a portrait I have never seen, and a grief I cannot measure, and a man I have known for 5 days. She thought, this is what it is to stand at the beginning of something. Everything is true at the same time. She picked up the pen. She kept writing. She wrote for 2 hours, and at the end she had 4 pages of what she actually thought, in the real language of her private mind, not careful, not compressed, but fully said. She would not send this to anyone. It was for herself, for the person she would be later when she read it back, the person who would know by then how things had gone. She folded the pages and put them inside the cover of the agricultural reform book, between the board and the first page. Then she went to the window and looked out at the garden, which was dark now, which was just shapes and shadow, and which tomorrow in the clear March light would be brown and honest and exactly itself. The letter from Pskov arrived 3 weeks later. It was longer than she expected. Nikolai was not, it turned out, a man who wrote brief letters. He wrote the way he spoke, with precision, with the occasional admission of uncertainty, with questions that were genuine rather than performative. He asked about the agricultural reform book. He asked what she was reading now. He reported, without drama, that the timber concern had produced a problem in his absence that he was in the process of resolving, and he described the nature of the problem, and his approach to it, with the same directness he brought to everything. At the end, he said, I would like to know more of what you think, if you're willing to share it. She read the letter twice, then she went to the desk and picked up her pen. She wrote back. The letters went back and forth through March and into April, arriving on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a regularity that her mother noticed and did not comment on. Masha kept them in a folder she had made from stiff paper, organized by date. She reread them in a way she did not reread most things, not because she had forgotten them, but because they were worth rereading. What she found, reading them again, was that they were accumulating into something, each letter added to the one before it. He mentioned a problem with the estate's water management in the third letter, and then in the seventh letter he mentioned that he had solved it, and she could see, between those 2 points, the shape of how he thought, the patience of it, the willingness to sit with a problem until it yielded rather than forcing it. She found, also, that she was telling him things she didn't normally tell people. Not because he asked careful questions, but he didn't press. It was more that the space he made in his letters, the way they left room for her answer, made her want to fill it honestly. She told him about the margin notes. She told him about the conversation with Helena and what she had said about understanding and acceptability both being true at once. She told him that she was turning 20 and that 20 seemed, and here she had paused over the word for a long time before she wrote it, incomplete, like a sentence that hadn't finished forming yet. He wrote back about turning 30 and feeling the same way, and still feeling it at 34. She had read that letter several times. Her birthday was a quiet affair. Her parents gave her a book which was thoughtful of them, and also demonstrated that they knew her well enough to know that a book was the right thing, even if they had also tried 10 days earlier to make her look as unimpressive as possible in front of a man from Pskov. She had told Helena, who had laughed. Masha had found, to her mild surprise, that she could laugh about it too, not without the underside of feeling, but without being disabled by it. A package arrived on her birthday from Pskov. It was the 3rd edition of the Ostrovsky. No letter with it, just the book wrapped in paper with a card inside the front cover in his handwriting that said only, "You were right about the footnote, it is still quite small." She sat with it for a moment. Then she opened it to the appendix he had mentioned, the section that attempted to address the soil quality problem, and she read it in one sitting. And he was right that it was better argued, and she was right that it still didn't solve it, and both of these things were true. She took out a piece of paper. She wrote to him about the appendix. She was specific, as she always was, but she found she was also lighter. There was something almost playful in the way she wrote about the footnotes, the way she catalogued the places where Ostrovsky had tried hard and the places where he had simply given up and hoped the reader wouldn't notice. She posted it the next morning. He replied in 4 days, which was fast. The post between their villages was not reliable, and 4 days meant he had written the same day her letter arrived. He had also, she found, catalogued the places where Ostrovsky had given up and hoped the reader wouldn't notice. His list overlapped with hers in some places and differed in others. He had caught things she'd missed. She had caught things he'd missed. She thought, we are reading the same book and seeing different things in it, and telling each other what we see. She thought, this is what I meant when I said I wanted to know him better. She was sitting in the back room with the letter when her mother came in, which happened sometimes. Her mother would come in and sit in the extra chair and not always say anything, which was a recent development and which Masha understood to be a particular kind of peace offering. She put the letter down but didn't put it away. Her mother looked at the Ostrovsky on the desk. She knew who had sent it. She said, he must read a great deal. Yes, Masha said. Does he? Is the correspondence, is it suitable? Her mother was asking whether the letters were proper, whether they contained the right things said in the right way. They are about books and estate management and timber concerns, Masha said. They are very suitable. Her mother nodded. She was looking at the book with an expression that Masha couldn't quite read, something that was not quite relief and not quite sadness but had elements of both. After a moment she said, he came for 5 days and didn't look at you the way men usually look. Masha said nothing. He looked at you the way, her mother stopped. She seemed to be deciding whether to finish the thought. Then she said carefully, he looked at you the way your father used to look at me, before things got difficult. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a bird was doing something in the garden. Masha said, I know. Her mother stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She was about to leave. Masha could see the decision to leave forming, and then she stopped and turned back and said one more thing which cost her something. The dress, she said, and the instructions, I want you to know. I know, Masha said. No, her mother said, let me say it. I want you to know that I was wrong about which problem I was solving. She said it carefully, as if it was something she'd thought about and found the right words for. I was trying to protect the family, but I didn't believe that you would be wanted, exactly as you are. I didn't believe that was possible. She paused. I was wrong about that. Masha looked at her mother. There was a long moment that was very still. "Thank you," Masha said. Her mother nodded once and left. Masha sat at her desk for a long time after that. She looked at the letter, she looked at the book, she looked at the wall above the shelves where there was nothing interesting. She thought, something has been said that needed to be said. She thought, that is worth something. She picked up the letter from Piskov and read it again, for the third time, and this time she was smiling, and she let herself smile, because there was no one in the room to see it, and she had spent enough of her life managing what her face showed. Outside the window, the April garden was finally beginning to change, the first real green at last, thin and tentative at the edges of the beds, but there, present, true. The season had arrived, the way seasons always did, without asking permission. In another 6 weeks, the formal proposal would come. She already knew she would say yes. She had known it, she realized, since the day he said "thank you for telling me" and went to the inn on the main road instead of the road back to Piskov. But knowing a thing and having it actually happen were different, and she was not done with the knowing yet. She had letters to write and an Ostrovsky to finish annotating, and a mother who had just said something important, and a birthday to be 20 on. She had time. Not a great deal, but enough. She picked up her pen. The formal proposal came by letter first, then in person. The letter arrived at the end of May, addressed to her father, and was everything a proper proposal letter was supposed to be, precisely worded, covering the arrangements and expectations that such things covered, courteous without being cold. Her father read it at the kitchen table with the expression of a man who is trying not to show how relieved he is. Her mother read it after him and handed it back without comment, which was its own kind of comment. Masha read it last, when both her parents had gone to bed. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp and read it slowly, the way she read everything, looking for the thing under the surface as well as the surface itself. What she found, under the correct and formal language of a marriage proposal, was the same person she had been corresponding with for 2 months. He had written in the final paragraph one sentence that was not quite formal but not quite personal either, that sat in the space between them. "I have thought about this carefully, which is always how I do things that matter to me." Not a declaration, not a performance, just an accurate statement about himself offered as a fact for her to consider. She folded the letter along its creases and put it in her folder with the others. The following Thursday, Nikolai Brenev came in person. He arrived in the same carriage, well-maintained and not ostentatious, and was received in the front room again with the full family. The good cloth was on the table, the tea service was out. This time, Masha was not in the blue dress. She was wearing her own dress, the dark green one she liked, with her hair the way she wore it when she wasn't being managed. Her mother had looked at her as she came downstairs and had said nothing, which was a different kind of nothing than before, not the silence of someone who disapproves and is controlling themselves, but the silence of someone who has decided to stop making a certain kind of decision. Nikolai noticed. She saw him notice, and she saw him look away without making anything of it, which was exactly the right thing to do. The formal part of the conversation was completed in the front room, with her parents present, and the correct exchanges made about arrangements and timing, and the practical elements of what was being decided. Her father had questions. Nikolai answered them directly and without inflation. Her mother had one question about where they would live in Piskov, as expected, and Nikolai answered her with information about the house and its arrangement, and what would be changed and what would not, and his delivery was matter-of-fact but also generous, and Masha watched her mother register the generosity. Then her father asked if he could have a word with Masha privately, which was not expected. Nikolai said of course, and her parents left the room, and it was just her father in the doorway, looking at her with his complicated expression. "You don't have to say yes," he said. She looked at him. "I want that to be clear," he said. He stopped. He was struggling with something and she let him struggle because it was his to say. "We put you in this situation, your mother and I, we did it for our reasons and I am not proud of all of them." He looked at the floor. "But this decision is yours. He is a good man, better than I thought possible. But if you—" "Father," she said. He looked up. "I want to say yes," she said. "I have wanted to say yes for several weeks." He looked at her for a moment. Then his face did something she hadn't seen it do in a long time, which was release, the letting go of something held tight for too long. He nodded once and went back out to the hallway. When Nikolai came back in, he and Masha were alone in the front room again, for the second time in 2 months, and this time there was no staging to undo. It was just them in the room in the afternoon in May. "My father asked you to come in so he could tell me I don't have to say yes," Masha said. Nikolai looked at her. "Good," he said. "He should have said it to me years ago," she said. "About anything." Nikolai was quiet. He understood, she could see, exactly what she meant, not just the proposal, but the shape of a life where that sentence had never been said to her before now. "You don't have to say yes," he said. "I know," she looked at him. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face, nothing dramatic, nothing excessive. Just the face of a man who has heard something he hoped for and is letting himself register it. "Thank you," he said. "You always say that," she said. "I always mean it," he said. The arrangements took 2 months to finalize. There was a discussion about the dowry, which was difficult because the Volkov family's financial situation was what it was, and Nikolai Brenev was in a position where he did not strictly need a dowry in the practical sense. He handled this with a straightforwardness that saved her father considerable pain. He said the arrangements were adequate as they were, and suggested a number that was lower than what was expected, which was actually a generous gesture dressed as a practical one. And her father understood this, and was grateful in the way men are grateful when they are saved from having to ask for help they needed. Masha understood it too. She filed it. She was learning the shape of how he was generous. It was never announced. It arrived dressed as something practical or neutral, and only if you were paying attention did you see the intention underneath. She thought this was probably the best kind of generosity, the kind that didn't require the recipient to feel a certain way about it. She began to prepare to leave. This was not a simple thing. She had lived her entire life in this house, in this village, in the sound range of these particular bells and bird sounds and neighbor dogs and road traffic. The back room with its shelves was the room she had learned to think in. The garden, still now moving through spring, genuinely green, the honest reward for all those brown months, was the garden she had walked in for 19 years. She packed her books first. She allowed herself to take all of them because nobody suggested otherwise, and because books were the one area where she made no concession to practicality. They went into 2 crates that would travel separately in the cart. She packed her clothes, which were few. The blue dress she left, folded neatly on the chair in her mother's room. She didn't make anything of this. She just left it there. She packed the folder of letters, which she put in her bag rather than in the crates. On the evening before she left, her cousin Helena came and they sat in the kitchen and ate the last of a cake Helena had brought and talked about everything and nothing for 3 hours. Helena cried a little, which surprised Masha, and then stopped, which did not surprise her. "You'll write," Helena said. "Yes," Masha said. "And if it's terrible, you'll tell me." "It won't be terrible," Masha said. Then she said, "But yes, I'll tell you." Helena looked at her. "Are you frightened?" Masha thought about this. She thought about the portrait in the upstairs hall, and the library, and a man who said that's fair and meant it, and the timber concern with its written records now, and a winter she would spend in a house she had never seen, in a city she had visited twice with her family years ago and barely remembered. "Yes," she said, "but I've been frightened before." "Of what?" "Of staying," Masha said. Helena looked at her for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took Masha's hand and held it, and didn't say anything, which was exactly the right thing. The morning of departure was cold for July, which was unusual and which felt somehow appropriate. Her parents were both up early. Her mother made the same tea she always made, and set it in the same glasses, and they sat together in the kitchen in the early light without talking very much. Her father ate his breakfast and read his newspaper, and this was so normal and so familiar that Masha found herself noticing each part of it with an attention she didn't normally bring to ordinary things. Her mother was the one who said, finally, after the breakfast was finished and the glasses were cleared, "He will be here by 10. "Yes," Masha said. "The crates are ready." "Yes." Her mother stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden, which was in full summer now, real and generous, giving its summer best. She stood there for a moment, and then she turned around and looked at her daughter and she said, "You were never plain, not for a single day." Masha looked at her. "I want that to be said," her mother said. "It should have been said earlier, but I want it to be said before you go." There was a moment, one of those moments that are not dramatic and are not quiet either, but are simply full of all the things that are true about two people who have known each other a long time and have managed and misunderstood and hurt each other by accident and by design, and still, underneath all of it, stayed. "I know," Masha said. Her mother nodded. She turned back to the window. Masha went to pack the last of her things. Nikolai arrived at 10 as expected. The carriage was there and the crates were loaded by the driver with efficiency, and her father shook hands and her mother stood in the doorway. Masha went to each of them and held them, and they held her back, and it was not a long farewell because long farewells are harder than short ones, and they all knew it. She got into the carriage. The driver clicked his tongue. The carriage moved. She looked out the window and her parents were standing in the doorway, her mother's hand raised in the particular still way she held it when she was managing herself, and her father beside her with his arm around her mother's shoulders, which was something Masha had not seen him do in years. The house got smaller, the garden passed, the gate, the road. She looked forward. Nikolai was across from her, reading a small book he had produced from his coat pocket. He was not ignoring her. She could see that he was available, that if she wanted to talk, he would put the book away. He was simply not forcing a momentous feeling onto a departure that she needed to go through in her own way. She looked out the window. She thought, "I am going toward something. This is a specific kind of fear." The village road became the main road. The main road opened up. On either side the summer field stretched in full color, and the sky was high and clear, and the cold morning was warming as the day came into itself. She thought, "The garden will be there when I visit." She thought, "In Pskov there is a library." She turned to the window and watched the fields, and the fear was there and the hope was there, and both of them were real, and she let them both be real at the same time. Nikolai turned a page. The carriage went on. The journey to Pskov took the better part of 2 days, with a stop overnight at an inn in a town she had never been to. The inn was clean and the food was adequate, and the owner's wife was a woman of approximately 50 who looked at Masha with the specific interest of someone who had never seen this man arrive with anyone and found it interesting. She did not ask questions. She showed Masha to her room with a kind efficiency, and in the morning she brought breakfast with extra bread and a small pot of very good jam, which was its own kind of welcome. Nikolai was at breakfast when she came down. He was, as she had come to expect, reading. She sat down. He put the book away. "Are you all right?" he said. Not, "How did you sleep?" Not, "Good morning, are you all right?" She had noticed over the months of letters that he went directly to the thing he actually wanted to know. "Yes," she said, "I think so." She paused. "It's a strange feeling. Leaving, I knew it would be strange, and it is still stranger than I knew." "Yes," he said, "I remember leaving my parents' house." He was quiet for a moment. "The strangeness doesn't mean it was wrong." "I know," she said. They ate breakfast in a companionable silence, which was its own milestone, the first silence they had shared that was not strategic or managed, just two people in the same place not needing to speak. She read during the second half of the journey. He did too. Occasionally one of them said something about what they were reading, or about the countryside passing, or about the timber concern, which he mentioned once in the context of the road they were taking, which passed through a forest that he knew slightly from business. He showed her the forest as they drove through it. He pointed out where the management was good and where it wasn't, the signs he could see from the road. She found she could follow most of what he was pointing at, and the parts she couldn't follow she asked about, and he explained them with patience and without condescension, and she thought, this is what it is like to learn something from someone who doesn't need to be superior while you're learning. Pskov arrived in the evening. She had been expecting a city in the abstract. What she found was specific, larger than she had fully understood, with the river and the old walls and the particular quality of northern light in July, going gold and long and serious. The carriage moved through streets she had not seen before, and she looked out at all of it and tried to put it in order, this new arrangement of the world she was going to be living in. The house was at the end of a street that was quieter than the center of the city. It was a good-sized house, not large enough to be cold, not small enough to feel crowded. There were lights in the windows when they arrived. Olga, the housekeeper, was at the door. Olga was perhaps 60, and she had the face of someone who had been through considerable weather and emerged from it with no particular bitterness but also no excess warmth. She was not unfriendly. She was simply accurate. She looked at Masha with the precise attention of someone taking a reading, and then she said, "Come in," and that was the whole of the welcome, and Masha found she liked it. She was shown through the house, the main rooms on the ground floor, the kitchen, the small sitting room, the dining room, the study where Nikolai did his accounts. Everything was in order, everything was clean. It was the house of a person who valued function and was not indifferent to comfort, but also did not use comfort as decoration. She was shown upstairs. She passed the portrait in the hall. She had known it would be there. She had thought about it many times. She had decided in those thoughts that she would look at it directly rather than pretend it wasn't there, because pretending things weren't there was not how she operated. She stopped in front of it. Vera Sorokina, she did not know for certain it was her, but she knew was perhaps 20 in the portrait, painted in the style of the period, formal but with something in the face that the formality hadn't quite managed to contain. She had light eyes and a particular expression that was attentive, which was the word that came to Masha immediately. She looked like someone paying attention. Masha stood there for a moment. She did not feel what she had imagined she would feel, which was some complicated mix of the emotions she had catalogued in her mind. What she felt was something simpler, a kind of acknowledgement. Here is a real person. She was real. She is still here in this house. She said nothing. She moved on. Her room was down the hall, a well-proportioned room with a window that looked over a garden, which was not the garden she had grown up in but was a garden, and had trees. Olga had put a lamp on the table and fresh water in the pitcher and left. Masha set her bag down. She stood in the room for a moment. Then she went downstairs to find the library. It took her 5 minutes to locate it. It was on the ground floor past the study, a room she had not been shown because perhaps nobody had thought to mention it, or perhaps Nikolai had decided to let her find it herself. Both seemed possible. The library was not large, 2 walls of shelves full with a third partly full, a reading chair by the window, a small table beside it, a lamp. Several books left open or stacked on the table, with the particular casual arrangement of books that are being actively read rather than displayed. She stood in the doorway. She looked at the shelves. She thought, this is mine now too. Not in a possessive sense, in the sense of access, of the possibility of 2 people sharing a thing that both of them valued. She would be able to come here whenever she wished. She would be able to take any book from those shelves. She would be able to sit in that chair and read, and Nikolai would probably come in and sit somewhere else and read, and they would be in the same room reading different things, and occasionally saying something about what they were reading, and that was a life. That was a specific and real kind of life that she had wanted without knowing how to name it. She went in, she looked at the shelves. She found the 3rd edition of the Ostrovsky where it should be, between 2 other books about agricultural economics. She took it down. It was her copy, he had given it to her, he had said so, but here it was, housed in this library in this arrangement. She thought, I will find a place for all of them, mine and his, mixed together on the shelves by subject, not by owner. She put the Ostrovsky back. She found the index of another book she had been looking for 2 years, and had never been able to locate, and she stood there with her heart doing something more dramatic than she would usually allow herself, because the book was there, and she could read it. She heard a step in the hallway. Nikolai appeared in the doorway. He looked at her standing in their library with the book in her hands. You found it, he said. You didn't show me, she said. No, he said, I thought you'd want to find it yourself. She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway with the same quality of patience she had come to recognize in him, the patience of someone who has genuinely decided that another person is worth the time, not as a principle, but as a specific fact about that specific person. She thought about the garden at home, brown in March, honest and patient. She thought about the sentence she had written in the letter she never sent. I want to remember what I thought before I knew how things would turn out. She thought, I don't know yet, I am at the beginning. Thank you, she said, for the library. It's yours, he said. I know, she said, and she meant it in the way that he meant things exactly without extras. She put the book she was holding back on the shelf. She would read it tomorrow properly with enough time to do it well. She turned around and walked toward the door, and he stepped back into the hallway to let her through, and they went to dinner. Olga had made something good. They sat at the dining room table and ate, and outside the July evening was going from gold to gray, And the house was quiet with the specific quiet of a place that knows how to be quiet, not empty, not sad, just at rest. She thought, so this is where I live now. She looked around the dining room, the table, the lamp, the window, the man across from her who was eating his dinner and occasionally looking up to say something about the food or the evening or the journey. And who looked, she noticed this, she filed it, who looked in this room, in this house, more at ease than he had looked anywhere else she had seen him. This was his place, he was himself here. She thought, I will learn what that means. Over time, it is the kind of thing you learn by being there. She ate her dinner. She thought about all of it, the portrait, the library, the room with the window and the garden, the housekeeper who said come in and meant it plainly, and she thought, I am here now. This is the beginning. She had been frightened of beginnings all her life. She was still frightened, but she was also, underneath the fear, something she had not expected to feel on the first evening in a new city, in a new house, in a new life. She was interested in everything. She looked at the window. The evening had completed its change to dark. In the garden she could see the shapes of trees, not her trees, not the trees she knew, but trees. She looked at them for a moment. Then she finished her dinner. The first month in Pskov was the month of learning where things were. Not the rooms, she had those figured out by the third day, the library and the kitchen and the study, and the route to the small market 2 streets over where Olga went on Wednesdays. What she was learning was something less mappable, the rhythms of the house, the particular quality of light in different rooms at different hours, the sound the stairs made, the way the garden in the morning looked different from the garden in the afternoon. She was learning the inside of a new life, the way you learn a new book, not just the plot but the sentences, the pauses, the specific weight of specific pages. She was also learning Nikolai. In some ways this was easier than she expected, because he was consistent. He was the same person at breakfast that he was in the library, the same person dealing with a problem in the accounts that he was in a conversation about books. He did not have the quality that some men had, and some women too, she had seen it, of being one person in company and another in private. He was simply himself, all the time, with the particular economy of someone who had long ago decided not to spend energy on presentation. In other ways, learning him was slower. He was quiet in ways she was still trying to understand, not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. She had found in 2 months of letters that he had a great deal to say when the subject interested him, but there were silences that had a different quality, mornings in certain months, evenings in certain kinds of weather. A particular stillness that came over him sometimes that was not general quietness, but something specific, something that had a cause she hadn't yet named. She did not press, pressing was not her instinct, and she did not think it was the right approach with him. She watched and she waited and she paid attention. She had found in the library that he had marked several books in the margins, not the neat specific marginal notes she made, but something more spontaneous, the marks of someone reading fast and responding immediately. His marks were often questions, where her notes said compare with Kovalev's claim in chapter 3 or error in the data here. His said things like, but why did they accept this? Or is this actually true, or does it only seem true from inside the system? She liked his questions. They were the kind of questions that didn't settle for the easy answer. She began quietly to leave notes for him in books she was reading, not big notes, just a sentence, a reference, occasionally a question of her own. At the bottom of the page in her small hand, she didn't tell him she was doing it. The first time he found one, he said nothing, just put the book down and looked at her across the room with an expression that was too small to name, but that was not nothing. The second time, he wrote a response in the margin below her note. The third time, there was a conversation about it that went on for an hour. This became one of the ways they were. The wedding had been a small affair. That was what they had both wanted, Nikolai because he was private about important things, Masha because she had not wanted a performance. Her parents had come from the village, and Helena had come, and there was a small group of Nikolai's acquaintances, men from the timber concern and the estates and a few others she was meeting for the first time. The church was not large. Everything was done correctly and briefly. Afterward there was dinner at the house, and her father made a toast that was, for her father, remarkably short and not too embellished. And Helena cried again and again stopped, and by 10 o'clock everyone had gone home and she and Nikolai were sitting in the library and she was reading and he was reading, and that was how it ended. She had thought later, that is exactly what I wanted. By September she had begun to find her arrangement in the life of the house. She took the accounts one morning, not all of them, not the estate accounts, which Nikolai managed with his particular Tuesday discipline, but the household accounts, which Olga had been keeping in a notebook that was functional but not especially clear. She reorganized them into a system that was easier to track, and she showed it to Olga without making anything of it, simply offering it as an alternative if Olga found it useful. Olga looked at it for a long time, then she said, "Yes, this is better," and adopted it without further discussion. Masha had been a little afraid of Olga, not in a dramatic way. Olga was not a frightening woman. But she was formidable in the way that capable, private people are formidable, and she had been with this household longer than Masha had, and she had seen things Masha hadn't seen. On a Tuesday in early October, Olga came to the library where Masha was reading and sat down. She rarely sat down in the same room Masha was in. This was unusual, and said, "You're not what I thought you'd be." Masha put her book down. "What did you think I'd be?" Olga considered this. "Something easier," she said, "or something harder, something that made more sense from the outside." She paused. "You're not trying to change anything." "No," Masha said. "Most people who come into a house want to change it." Masha thought about this. "I wanted the library," she said. "Everything else seemed fine as it was." Olga made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. She got up and went back to the kitchen. After that, things between them were easier, in the particular way that practical people get easier with each other, not warmer exactly but less guarded, more efficient. Olga began occasionally telling Masha things she hadn't been told, small information about the house and its history and the neighbors and the city, offered without preamble, without sentiment, and always useful. On an October evening when the light had gone gray and the first cold was settling into the streets, Nikolai came home from the timber concern with the look that she had begun to learn to read, the slight compression around the eyes, the particular set of his shoulders that meant he had been dealing with something that had gone wrong. She did not ask. She let him come in and put down his coat and sit at the kitchen table where Olga had left something warm, and she sat across from him and poured tea, and she waited. "The agreement with the Western woodcutters," he said after a while. "What happened?" "Dispute over the volume." He looked at his tea. "We have the records, so the dispute is resolvable, but the relationship is damaged. And the relationship matters for next season's work." "What would help the relationship?" He looked at her. "Not the records," she said. "Those solve the dispute. What helps the relationship?" He thought about it. "Going in person," he said. "Spending time there, not sending a letter." "Then do that." He was quiet. "I was going to wait until the formal resolution." "People trust presence more than resolution," she said. "The resolution confirms that you were right. The presence confirms that you care about more than being right." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "You're correct." "I know," she said. Something moved in his face, the movement before a smile, the one that came from inside. She had been learning to see it. He went to the Western woodcutters the following week. He stayed 3 days. When he came back, the look around his eyes was different, not resolved exactly, but easier. He sat at the kitchen table again and told her what had happened, which was that the relationship was better, which was what she had said it would be. "How did you know?" he said. "I thought about what would work," she said. "It's the same as the Ostrovsky problem. You have to ask why the numbers behave as they do, not just what the numbers are." He looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I had that backwards for a while. I thought the records were the point, that if the record was right, the relationship would follow." "Records are necessary," she said. "They're not sufficient." "No," he said, "they're not." She refilled his tea glass. He picked it up. Outside, the October evening was settling into the first real dark of autumn, the kind that had a weight to it, and from the street below the window came the sounds of the city going home. She thought, "We are building something." Not the formal structure, that was already built, the legal and social arrangement of a marriage, the household and the accounts and the arrangement with Olga and the names on the church record. What they were building was the interior structure, the living thing, the way two people learn to be in each other's company in a manner that doesn't require constant effort. It was going well. She had been afraid it wouldn't, or that it would go well in a formal sense but not in the real one. But it was going well in the real sense, the sense that mattered. They had genuine things to say to each other, they were learning each other's rhythms, They were useful to each other in the way that people are useful to each other when they are paying real attention. She was also becoming useful to the timber concern. This had happened sideways, not by plan. Nikolai had mentioned the woodcutter problem to her partly because she was there and partly, she suspected, because he had found that saying things out loud to her produced clearer thinking. She had said useful things, he had noticed. A few weeks later he had mentioned something else, a question about a supplier, and she had thought about it and said what she thought, and he had listened and said that's fair and had done the thing she suggested. She did not have a formal role. She was not a business partner in any recognized sense. She was simply present and attentive and capable, and gradually the conversations about the timber concern became a regular feature of evenings, the way the library was a regular feature and the Tuesday accounts were a regular feature. She was careful not to press. She offered what she saw and left him to take it or not. He consistently took it. He said one evening, "You should have the estate accounts too." She looked at him. "I don't mean instead of me," he said. "I mean you should be able to look at them when you want to. You see things I miss." "I'm not a trained accountant," she said. "Neither am I," he said. "My father taught me what he knew and I learned the rest by doing it." He paused. "The same way you learned agricultural economics." She thought about this. She thought about a ledger of yield records in her father's house, unread except by her. She thought about the schoolteacher's books, the agricultural history with its long section on economics. "All right," she said. He brought the estate accounts the following Tuesday. She read them that night. She found in the second estate's records a pattern that he had not noticed, a consistent underperformance in one particular quarter that had been present for 4 years and which, when she looked at it closely, pointed to a problem not in the estate itself, but in the supplier arrangement for one of the key inputs. She told him the next morning. He looked at the records. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I've been looking at the wrong thing for 4 years." "You've been looking at the outcome," she said. "The outcome looks like an estate problem. The cause is a supplier problem." "Yes," he said. "It's the Ostrovsky issue," she said. He was looking at the outcome of the agricultural reform and calling it evidence about the reform itself. "You were looking at the estate's output and assuming the problem was inside the estate." He looked at her. He was doing the thing where he registered something. She had become skilled at reading this. "Thank you," he said. "You always say that," she said. "I always mean it," he said. She thought, this is what I wanted. Not this specific thing, not the estate records or the supplier problem or the timber concern, but this. A life where something I see matters to someone. She thought about the blue dress and the instructions and the plan to make her look unimpressive. She thought about it without anger, which she had mostly arrived at. She thought about it with the particular clarity of distance, the ability to see a thing completely because you are no longer inside it. She had not been sent back. She had not been sent back, and the sending back had never been in question, and none of the careful management her family had done had mattered at all, because what had actually happened was that a man had asked twice what she was reading, and the answer she gave was true, and truth turned out to be what he was looking for. She looked at the estate records. She looked at the pattern she had found. She thought, I am exactly where I meant to be. Outside, November was arriving in Pskov with the seriousness of a northern November, and the house was warm, and the library was full, and the Tuesday accounts were going to be different from next Tuesday onward. She picked up her pen. Winter came hard that year, which was not unusual for Pskov. The city knew how to be cold in a particular way, a functional cold, not a dramatic one. The streets got quieter. The market moved partly indoors. The timber concern slowed in the way it always slowed in December, and Nikolai had more time in the house, which was a change in the rhythm that she found she liked. They developed a winter habit, the two of them. After dinner, they went to the library. Not always together, sometimes she was there and he joined her, sometimes the reverse, but the library in the evening became a given, the way certain things become givens in a shared life without either person declaring them. She had reorganized the library. This had been a careful process. She had not rearranged it arbitrarily, and she had not done it without thought. She had looked at his arrangement first. He organized by acquisition, roughly, which meant the books were in a loose chronological order of when he'd gotten them, and she had thought about what she was trying to do. What she was trying to do was make it easier to find what you needed. which meant organizing by subject with some allowance for relationship between subjects. She had moved things section by section over the course of 2 weeks, quietly, without announcing it. The night she finished, he came in and stood in the door for a long time looking at the shelves. She watched him from the reading chair. He went to one section, he found a book. He looked at where it was and what was next to it and what was near it. He put it back. He went to another section. "You put mine and yours together," he said. "By subject," she said. "It seemed more useful." He was quiet. He was still looking at the shelves. "Yes," he said. He came and sat down, not in his usual chair, in the one next to her, and picked up a book from the small table and opened it. She thought, he understands what that meant, putting them together. She thought, and he is all right with it. She looked back at her book. In January, a letter came from her father with news that their neighbor had finally resolved the fence dispute, which had been ongoing for 3 years, and which had apparently ended with both parties agreeing to move the fence a foot in a direction that inconvenienced neither of them, and required only the willingness to stop arguing. Her father's letter had a lightness to it that she recognized as relief, and under the relief was something else. He talked about the land differently than he used to, more specifically, with more interest in the actual behavior of the soil. She thought he might have gone back to the ledger. She wrote back and asked him about it. He confirmed it. He said he had been reading the yield records for the past 3 months, and had found the pattern she had described, the underperformance in the upper field, and had talked to the tenant about changing the crop rotation. He said the tenant had been skeptical but willing. He said he was interested in how it went. She read this letter several times. She thought about her father in his house, reading the ledger, doing something specific with what he found. She thought about the version of him who had borrowed with good intentions for 20 years, and the version of him who had told her in the front room, "You were remarkable, I always knew it." She wrote back, "Ask the tenant about the flax in the lower field. I think the conditions are right." Then she told Nikolai what she had said, and he asked about the soil conditions in that area, and they talked about it for the better part of an evening in the way they talked about everything, with the equal-footed attention that was, she had concluded, the best thing about them. In February, there was an evening when she came to the library and found him not reading. He was sitting in his chair with the book open on his knee but not looking at it. He was looking at the window, at the dark outside. His face had the quality she had been slowly learning to identify, the specific stillness that had a cause. She sat down, she took her own book from the table, she opened it. She did not ask, she read. He sat, she read. After perhaps 20 minutes he said, without turning from the window, it was February when she got sick. She looked up, he was still looking at the window. She was sick for 3 weeks, he said, and then she wasn't sick anymore, and then she was gone, it was very fast. She put her book down on the table. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She had always found that phrase, however genuine, was a small offering for a large thing. She sat and let him speak, because he was speaking and he needed the space to do it. "I did everything I was supposed to do," he said. "I was there, I did what the doctor said, I did everything I thought I could do." He paused. "It made no difference at all." "No," she said. "That took me a long time," he said, "to understand that sometimes nothing you do makes a difference." He looked at his hands. "I kept thinking for years that there was something I should have done differently, and eventually I understood that there wasn't. It was just what happened." She waited. "I'm not," he stopped, started again. "I want you to know that this is not," he looked at her, and his face had the quality of someone saying something that is difficult to say accurately. "What I have here, with you, is its own thing, it is not a replacement, it is not a consolation." She looked at him. "I want to be clear about that," he said. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about it the way she thought about all important things, finding the right version, the true one, the one that was neither too much nor too small. "I know," she said, "and I want to say something back, which is that I am not frightened by the portrait. I was before I came, I thought about it a great deal, but I'm not anymore. She was real and she was here and she mattered to you, and those things are all true, and this is also true." She looked at him steadily. "Both of those things can be true at the same time." He looked at her. She had said that before to Helena about her mother, about understanding and acceptability. It was the same idea, the capacity to hold two real things at once without making one of them wrong. He looked at her for a long time, then he looked back at the window. Yes, he said, they can. The fire was burning down. The library was warm. Outside, Pskov was deep in February, and the cold was doing its particular work on the streets, and in the hallway the portrait was in its place, and in this room two people were sitting with the ordinary extraordinary difficulty of being alive and trying to do it honestly. She reached over to the small table and got her book. He looked at his, which was still open on his knee. They read. Not for long, maybe another hour. Then the fire was too low and they went to bed, and outside the February cold did not relent, and in the morning it was still February and life continued. She thought about what he had said, it is not a replacement, not a consolation. She thought about what that made it, and she could not quite name it, but she knew what it felt like. It felt like something built on real ground, not the ground of being the only one, not the ground of being the best one, not the ground of being chosen because there was no one else to choose. The ground of being seen. That, she thought, was enough, that was more than enough. She made tea in the morning and looked at the winter garden and thought, we will have many Februaries. And some of them will have this quality, this weight, and we will sit in the library and let it be there. She thought, I can do that. She thought, I want to. She poured the tea and waited for him to come down, and when he did he looked at the tea and said thank you, and she said you always say that, and he said I always mean it, and this time they were both smiling, and the February morning came in through the window pale and cold and honest, and that was fine. That was exactly fine. The second year was different from the first. The first year had the quality of discovery. Every week was the first time something was true, the first winter, the first autumn, the first time a problem was solved together. The second year was different because the first time had already happened, and what you were working with now was the second time, the accumulation, the evidence that something had held. Masha noticed this in October, when the first cold came back to Pskov, and the library felt familiar in a way it hadn't felt familiar the October before. She noticed it in the way she moved through the house, not the careful navigation of someone learning a new place, but the ease of someone who knew where everything was and had stopped noticing that she knew. She noticed it in the way she and Nikolai talked. The first year there had been a quality of not effort, not exactly, but awareness. An awareness of the conversation as a thing that was happening, a thing being built. By the second year the awareness had softened into the background. They talked the way you breathe, without thinking about the mechanism. She thought, this is what it means to be settled in something. The word settled had bothered her once. She had heard it used to describe her sister's marriages and had found it insufficient, too small, too still, too lacking in heat. But she understood it differently now. Settled was not the absence of something. Settled was the presence of a specific kind of solidity, the kind that comes from having been through a first winter together and come out on the other side, having navigated a real difficulty, the woodcutter dispute, the estate accounts, the February conversation, and found that the navigation had made things stronger rather than weaker. She wrote to Helena in October and used the word, and Helena wrote back, "You sound like yourself, only more so," which was, Masha thought, a very accurate description of what she felt. She had been afraid in the early months that Pskov would shrink her. She had grown up in a small house in a small village and had learned to navigate its smallness, but what she had been navigating it toward was always something larger, some horizon of the mind that the village couldn't quite contain. She had been afraid that a new house in a new city might offer the same problem in a different form, a life shaped by someone else's needs and someone else's rhythms, her own horizon managed out of view. This had not happened. It had not happened partly because of the library and partly because of the estate accounts and partly because of Nikolai himself, his specific quality of wanting to know what she thought, not as a courtesy but as a genuine preference. But it had also not happened, she recognized, because of her own determination. She had not waited to be invited into the life. She had moved into it, carefully and without force but consistently, the way water moves into the available space. She had, by the second autumn, things that were hers in the life of the house. The accounts, the letters to suppliers, she had begun drafting these, and Nikolai reviewed them, and they were better than the ones he'd been writing, he said so directly. A correspondence with a land management journal that had begun when she sent a letter in response to an article she disagreed with, and which had produced, to her mild surprise, an invitation to write something for them. She had written it. Nikolai had read it twice and pointed out one thing she had not explained clearly enough, and she had revised it. It had been accepted and published. It was the first thing she had written that existed in the world outside the folders in her desk. She had not told her parents immediately. She had let it sit for a week, this fact of having published something, and she had turned it over in her mind with the particular care she brought to things that mattered. Then she wrote to Helena. Helena wrote back within 3 days. The letter was 4 lines. You published something. I knew you would. Your mother is going to cry when you tell her. Tell her before I tell her by accident. She told her mother. Her mother did cry briefly, and then composed herself and wrote back a letter that was half congratulation and half a list of questions about the journal, and who read it, and whether it was well regarded, which was entirely like her mother. Her father wrote back 1 sentence, I always knew. She had read that sentence 3 times, then she had put the letter in the folder with the others. The timber concern had a difficult autumn. This was not catastrophic. It was the kind of difficulty that a well-managed concern could absorb, a weather problem that affected the cutting season and reduced the volume below what the contracts required. Nikolai dealt with it the way he dealt with everything, directly with written records in person with the parties affected. He went to 2 of the 3 affected buyers personally, explained the situation, renegotiated the terms with honesty. The 3rd buyer was managed by letter. She watched him do this and thought about the first time she had seen him, the man in the well-maintained carriage who walked toward the door without performing his arrival. She thought about the quality that had been visible then and was visible now, that particular quality of a person who had decided how they were going to do things and did them that way consistently. Not rigidly, she had seen him change his approach when the evidence said to change it. She had seen him say that's fair and adjust, but with a consistency that was something like integrity. The same rules in the hard moments as in the easy ones. She thought, I respect him. She had thought on that first afternoon that he was interesting. She had thought in the months since many more specific things. But she was thinking now about respect, which she had not let herself think about too directly, because it seemed like a large word, a word that required evidence, and she had been accumulating evidence for a 1.5 years and now she had enough. She respected him. She thought this was not a common thing in marriages. She thought it was probably the most important thing. The winter of the 2nd year was colder than the first. The house was warm, which was good. Olga had a quality in winter of becoming more formidable, as if the cold outside increased her efficiency inside, and the kitchen was reliably warm and the table was reliably set, and the firewood was reliably stacked. Masha had come to appreciate Olga with something she could only call affection, though she would not have said that word to Olga and Olga would not have welcomed it. What they had was practical and genuine and mutual, which was its own kind of warmth. She went to the market on a Wednesday in December and ran into a woman she had met twice before, the wife of one of the timber concern's buyers, a woman named Clara who was capable and forthright, and had a quality of directness that Masha found refreshing. They walked through the market together and talked, and the conversation moved in the way of 2 people who are discovering they have more in common than their initial meetings suggested. Clara said at some point, "Your husband is not what I expected." Masha looked at her. "What did you expect?" "Something colder," Clara said. "My husband says he is very direct. Men in business usually mean something cold when they say a man is very direct." She paused. "He's not cold." "No," Masha said, "he's not." "He's careful," Clara said. "Yes." "There's a difference," Clara said. "Careful men who aren't cold are rare." Masha thought about this. She thought about the fair and the careful and the quality of going in person to the affected buyers and explaining the situation honestly. She thought about 3 copies of the Ostrovsky bought by accident and the small footnote. "Yes," she said. "I've found that too." She walked back from the market in the December cold with her basket and her thoughts, and she thought about the fact that she was in her 2nd year in Pskov and she had made a friend, which was something she had been less sure of than the library. She was not an easy person to befriend. She required in friends the same things she required in everything else: honesty, attention, the willingness to change one's mind when the evidence said to. She had found this infrequently. Clara seemed tentatively to offer it. She thought, this is what building a life looks like, not all at once, piece by piece, until there is enough of it to be called a life. In the library that evening, she told Nikolai about the conversation with Clara. He listened. He said he thought well of Clara's husband, that he was one of the buyers he had gone to in person, and that the conversation had been difficult in the right way, the way that difficult conversations are when both people are honest. I think she might become a friend, Masha said. Good, he said. She looked at him. You don't mind? He looked back, slightly puzzled. Why would I mind? I don't know, she said. I wondered if it would seem like she stopped. She thought about what she was actually asking. I suppose I was asking whether you wanted me to have friends, whether you had opinions about it. He thought about this. You should have friends, he said. I think it would be strange if you didn't, and I would be concerned if you didn't. A person needs people. He paused. You've been patient about the way we live, which is fairly quiet. I don't want you to think that I think quiet is the only option. She looked at him. She said, what if I told you I like quiet? I would believe you, he said, and I would also say that quiet is better when it's chosen. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He picked up his book. She picked up hers. She thought about choice. She thought about the blue dress and what its opposite looked like, not the green dress she had worn on the day of the proposal, though that was part of it. The opposite of the blue dress was this. The opposite of the blue dress was a life where what she wore and what she said and what she thought and what she did were understood to be her own, and were valued for that reason. She was in the opposite of the blue dress. She read for a while, then she said without looking up, I'm going to write another letter to the journal. What about? The estate management problem, the supplier pattern I found. He was quiet for a moment. You should use the actual data, he said, with specific numbers. May I? Of course, he said. She looked at him. He was reading. He had said of course without looking up, the way you say something when it is so obviously yes that looking up is unnecessary. She thought, this is mine now. She didn't mean the data, though it was partly the data. She meant the whole arrangement, the Tuesday accounts, the library with their books mixed together, the winter habit and the market, and the letter to the journal and the friend who might become a friend. She meant the life, the specific real life that she had been afraid she wasn't going to be allowed to have, and which she was having. She looked back at her book. She read for another hour. Then the fire was low again and she went to bed, and in the morning it was December in Pskov, cold and serious and exactly itself. She thought, tomorrow I will begin the letter. She fell asleep. The letter took a week to write, not because it was long, it was not particularly long, but because it required her to be more precise than she usually allowed herself in first drafts. The data was specific, and the argument needed to match the specificity, and each time she thought she had it right she read it again and found one more place where the language was doing vague work that the numbers didn't support. She showed it to Nikolai when it was finished. He read it carefully in the way he read things fully without skipping. Then he said, the third paragraph, the claim about regional variance. You're using 2 years of data and the claim needs 3 to be sound. She read the third paragraph. You're right, she said. You have the data, he said. Yes, she said, I'll add it. She added it. The paragraph became stronger. The argument became harder to argue with. She sent the letter. It was accepted. It was published in spring, when the thaw had come and the Pskov streets were doing the particular thing they did when winter loosened, the sound of water, the change in the quality of light, the sense of the city remembering how to move. She had 2 pieces in the journal now. She had a name in the journal. She had a name in the world, a small name, a name that 300 or 400 readers of a land management publication would see on an article, and which meant exactly nothing to almost everyone, and which meant to her that she was a person who had found the thing she had to say and found the place to say it. She walked home from the market on the day she received the copies of the issue, with the journal in her basket and the spring air doing its good work around her, and she thought about the girl in the blue dress in the front room with her hands in her lap and her eyes at the middle distance. She thought about what she would say to that girl if she could. She thought she would say, you don't have to be afraid. You are going to say the right thing by accident, the truest thing, the thing you were told not to say, and it will turn out to be the thing that changes everything. She thought she would say, you are already exactly who you need to be. You just haven't been believed yet. She got home. She put the journal on the table in the library next to the Ostrovsky. She made tea. She sat in the window with the tea and the spring light, and she looked at the garden, which was coming back to itself after winter, and she was 21.5 years old, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. The garden was not her mother's garden, but it was hers now. Clara came to the house for the first time in March. Invited for tea in the way you invite someone for tea when you have decided to invest in them. She came on a Wednesday, which was the day of the market, so she came directly from the market with her basket, which meant she arrived in the way Masha preferred people to arrive, without ceremony, already doing a thing. They had tea in the sitting room and talked for 2 hours, and the conversation went everywhere, from the journal article, which Clara had read with attention and had questions about, to the timber concerns difficulties in the previous autumn, to Clara's own business interest in her husband's enterprise, which was more substantial than most people assumed because most people didn't ask. She managed the accounts, Clara said, and the correspondence with the distant buyers and had for years, and her husband had never once felt the need to announce this to anyone. "Does that bother you?" Masha said. Clara thought about it honestly, which was what she liked about her. "Sometimes," she said, "not because I need recognition. Because I occasionally want to be useful, without having to pretend I arrived at the answer by accident." Masha looked at her. "Women in business," Clara said, "you understand." "Yes," Masha said. "You don't pretend," Clara said. "I've noticed that. Your husband doesn't require you to." "No," Masha said. "That's not common." "I know." Clara looked at her tea. "My husband is also good," she said. "I want to say that. He values what I do. He just doesn't find it necessary to say so, and occasionally I find it necessary to be told." Masha said, "Have you told him that?" Clara was quiet for a moment, not in those words. Masha thought about what she knew of Nikolai, of the quality she had named respect, of the February conversation and the portrait and the specific way he listened. She thought about what had made the difference in her own life, which was not that he was remarkable but that he asked directly and listened to what he was told. "Tell him in those words," she said. "I have found that the most efficient method." Clara looked at her, then she laughed, a real laugh, the unself-conscious one. "Yes," she said, "I imagine you have." After Clara left, Masha stood at the window for a while. She was thinking about what Clara had said. "Your husband doesn't require you to pretend." She had heard it as a compliment, and it was one, but it was also a statement of something she had been living with so naturally that she hadn't been naming it. She was not required to pretend. She had not been required to pretend since the afternoon in the front room when she had answered the question twice asked and told him the conditions under which he was meeting her. She had told the truth, and it had not been punished. It had been met. He had met it with more truth. She thought that is what a marriage can be, a sustained meeting of truths. Not without difficulty. Not without winter and the specific weight of February and the timber concerns problems and the occasional misunderstanding that had to be talked out. But underneath the difficulty, a commitment to honesty that made the difficulty workable. She went to the library. She sat at the small table by the window. She took out a piece of paper. She began writing something that was not for the journal and not a letter. It was something more personal, a kind of record. She wrote about Clara's visit and about the question of pretending and about what she had learned in 2 years of being in Pskov about what it meant to be genuinely known. She wrote about her father's ledger and the flax in the lower field. She wrote about the Ostrovsky footnote. She wrote about what it had meant to her that someone had asked twice. She wrote for an hour without stopping, in the small, neat hand she used for private things, and when she stopped she looked at what she had written, which was several pages of something that was not yet anything, not an article, not a letter, not a memoir, just a record. She thought, maybe this is what it is to have a life worth recording. Not a remarkable life, not a life of dramatic events, a life of paying attention and being paid attention to, a life of a good library and a winter garden, and a man who said that's fair and a woman named Clara who laughed a real laugh and a journal that published what she actually thought. She looked at the garden. The March snow was retreating. Under the retreating edge of it, the first things were beginning. She picked up the pen and kept writing. By the time Nikolai came home in the early evening, she had 10 pages. She put them away before he came in, not because she was hiding them from him, but because she wasn't ready yet to explain what they were. She would tell him eventually. She told him most things eventually, but some things needed to be whole before they were shared. He came in and they had dinner, and afterward they went to the library and read, and at some point he said, without looking up from his book, "Did Clara come?" "Yes," Masha said, "we talked for 2 hours." "Is she going to be a real friend?" "I think so," Masha said. "Good," he said. He turned a page. She looked at him over the top of her book. She thought about what Clara had said. She thought about the specific quality of a person who was glad you were making a friend without needing to be the center of the story about it. I published 2 pieces in the journal, she said, this spring. He looked up. I know, he said. I don't think I've said thank you, she said, for the data. For reading the drafts. He was quiet for a moment. You did the work, he said. Yes, she said, but you made the space. You gave me the accounts and you read what I wrote and you said of course when I asked if I could use the data. She looked at him. That isn't nothing. He was quiet. He was registering something. She had become skilled enough at reading this that she could see it happening, the slight shift, the thing being taken in. You're welcome, he said. She looked back at her book. And thank you, he said, for the accounts, for the supplier pattern, for the letter to the woodcutters. He paused. I look at the Tuesday numbers differently now, because of how you taught me to look. She said, Ostrovsky. Yes, he said. Ostrovsky. They both looked back at their books. The fire burned. The library was warm. Outside, Marcin Piskov was being exactly what Marcin Piskov always was, cold and stubborn and slightly hopeful. She thought, we are not a simple thing. We are a complicated thing that works. She thought, that is better. She turned a page. The 3rd year brought the hardest winter. She knew it was going to be difficult before it started. There was a quality to the October cold that year, something more serious in it, that told her the coming months were going to require more than the usual reserves. She was right. November came early and stayed. December was brutal in the efficient way of northern winters, not dramatic but relentless, and by January the house was a fortress against the outside world, and the outside world was doing its best to get in. Nikolai became distant in January. She noticed it on the 3rd and she tracked it carefully through the week, the way she tracked anything she was trying to understand. It was not the same quality as the February disturbance of the previous year. She knew that one now knew its texture and its cause, knew when to be present and when to be quiet. This was different. This was not grief precisely. It was something else, something she did not yet have a name for. By the 8th of January, she was working hard not to fill in the blank with her own anxieties. By the 12th, she was struggling more than she was willing to show. Thing about Masha was that silence in her experience had 2 meanings. The first was the silence she had learned with Nikolai, the productive kind, the reading side-by-side kind, the kind that said, I am present and there is nothing I need you to say right now. The second was the silence she had grown up in, the silence that preceded decisions being made about her without her, the silence that came before the blue dress and the instructions and the careful reduction of a person into something that could be managed. She had learned in her family home that silence sometimes meant, we have given up on this situation but we haven't said so yet. She knew that these were different silences. She knew this with her mind. Her body was less certain. By the 14th she was cold in the way she had been cold in the front room when she was 18, the deliberate protective cold that was not really coldness but was its armor. She was not unkind. She was simply contracted, smaller than she usually was, managing. He noticed, she could see him notice, and she could see him watching her the way she had been watching him, and she could see that he understood something was wrong but not what it was, because what it was inside her and she had not told him. The evening of the 15th, she was in the library when he came in. She was reading. He sat down and looked at his book and did not open it, which was unusual. Then he said, what is happening? She looked up. I know I have been inside myself this month, he said. I can see that you've been managing something because of it. I want to know what it is. She was quiet for a moment. She was finding the true version of the thing to say. I don't know your silence well enough yet, she said. That is what it is. When you go quiet in a specific way, the way you've been this month, I don't know what it means. I know February, I learned February. This is different and I don't know it, and when I don't know something I fill in the blank with the thing I know from before. She looked at the window. And what I know from before is that silence can mean, I have decided something and I haven't told you. He was very still. I'm not saying that's what's happening, she said. I'm saying that's what I know from before you, and I haven't been able to entirely stop knowing it. He was quiet for a long time. The fire was burning. The house was tight against the January outside. The timber concern, he said. There's a problem, larger than the autumn difficulty. One of the estates is also underperforming. I have been trying to work through the scale of it. He paused. I am sometimes, when I am working through something large, I go inward. I have always done this. It is not about you. It is not about us. She looked at him. I know, she said. I do know that, but knowing it in my mind and knowing it when I'm inside the silence are different things. Yes, he said, I understand that. Tell me about the problem, she said. He looked at her. Tell me about the timber concern, she said. Tell me what you're working through, not because I will necessarily have a useful idea, though I might, but because then I am inside the problem with you and not outside the silence. He thought about this. Something shifted. She could see it shift. He leaned forward slightly, the way he did when he was going to say something specific, and he told her about the problem. It took an hour. It was complicated, multiple interconnected difficulties, the weather problem compounded by a management disagreement at one of the estates, a cash flow constraint that was not critical but required careful navigation. He laid it out with the precision he brought to everything, and she listened with equal precision and asked the questions she needed to ask, and by the end they were not at the solution but they were at the clear statement of the problem, which was the necessary first step. She said, the estate management disagreement, is that the center of it? Probably, he said. Then that's where you start. The timber concerns weather problem has a fixed ceiling. You can't control the weather, you can only navigate the contracts. The cash flow issue is a consequence of the other two, but the management disagreement is the one that has a human solution. He was looking at her. Go there, she said. In person, you already know this works. He was quiet. Then he said, yes. She said, and when you're working through something large, tell me. You don't have to have a solution. Tell me you're working through something large and I can match the quiet differently. He looked at her for a moment. I will try to do that, he said. I am not always aware of how much of it I'm carrying internally until someone points it out. I know, she said. It's the same for me with the cold. He looked at her steadily. The cold, he said. When I get contracted, when I get smaller, I'm not always aware of it while it's happening. He was quiet. I noticed it, he said. I didn't know what it was. Now you do, she said. Yes, he said, now I do. The fire had burned low again. It was always burning low by the time they finished the important conversations. She thought this was because the important conversations needed the fire to still be going when they started, and went on long enough that by the end it had done most of its work. She got up and put another piece of wood on. The fire took it. The room warmed again. I'm going to the estate next week, he said. Good, she said. Will you look at the cash flow while I'm gone? Yes, she said. She sat back down. He opened his book. She opened hers. She thought, this is what you build in the difficult years. You build the ability to say the true thing and have it received. Not every time, no one managed every time. But consistently enough that the saying and the receiving became the default, became what you reached for when the thing in front of you was hard. She thought about the blue dress. She thought about the instructions. She thought about the girl who had been told to make herself smaller, who had managed to be too large anyway, who had said the true thing because she couldn't help saying it, and had been met with more truth. She thought that was the beginning, and this is what follows the beginning, not the end of difficulty, the ability to carry difficulty in a way that doesn't break things. She read for a while. Then she said without looking up, I have been writing something, since March. It's not an article, I don't know what it is yet. He looked up. What's it about? About what it means to be known, she said, and what it takes and what it costs. He was quiet. Will I read it? Eventually, she said, when it's finished, which may be years. All right, he said. He went back to his book. She thought that was easy, the thing I was afraid to say. It came out and it landed and he said all right and went back to his book, which was exactly what was needed. She went back to hers. He went to the estate in the second week of January and was gone for 4 days. In those 4 days, she examined the cash flow problem with the same methodology she had used for the supplier pattern, looking for the structural cause underneath the symptom, looking at what the numbers were doing and asking why. She found it was not dramatic. It was a billing schedule that had been set up without reference to the seasonal income pattern of the concern, which meant the obligations peaked in the months when the income was lowest, which was manageable in good years and constrained in difficult ones. The fix was not complicated, a renegotiation of the billing schedule with 2 creditors, A shifting of payments by 30 days that would align the outflows with the inflows. Not difficult. Just unnoticed, because the person looking at the accounts had been looking at the totals and not the timing. She prepared the notes. She laid it out clearly, the way she laid out arguments step by step, each claim supported by the specific data, nothing asserted without the backing. He came home on the 5th day. The estate problem was not solved, but the ground had been cleared, which was what she had said would happen. He sat at the kitchen table and told her what had been said and how, and she listened and asked questions, and he looked as he always looked after something difficult had been addressed directly, tired but cleaner. She showed him the cash flow notes. He read them. He said nothing for a moment. She said, "Am I right about the timing?" "Yes," he said. "And the fix?" "Yes," he said. He was still looking at the notes. "Yes, you're right about the fix." He looked up. "How did I not see this?" "You were looking at the totals," she said. "I should have been looking at the timing." "Now you will," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the expression that was the movement before the smile, "You would have been a formidable accountant." "I am a formidable accountant," she said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite sound that people make at polite jokes, but the genuine thing from somewhere inside. She had heard it before and she valued it each time because it was not a sound he made often, and when he made it, it meant something was genuinely funny. She thought, there is the laugh, it still surprises me. She thought, I want to keep surprising it out of him for a long time. "The billing renegotiation," she said. "Do you want to handle it or shall I draft the letters?" "Draft the letters," he said. "I'll review them." She nodded. She went to the library and picked up a pen. The January cold was still doing its work outside. The house was warm. Nikolai was at the kitchen table finishing his tea and looking at her cash flow notes, and in the upstairs hall the portrait was in its place, and in the library the books were arranged by subject with hers and his mixed together, and the piece of writing that was not yet anything had 10 pages in her desk. She wrote the first letter, then the second, then she read them back and made one change to each. She put them on the table beside the tea. She went to sit in the library. She had been afraid in the cold middle of January that something was going wrong. She had been afraid in the specific way of someone who has been hurt before in a particular direction and remains sensitive to that direction. She had been cold and contracted and smaller than usual. And then she had said the true thing, and he had said the true thing, and the problem had been named and addressed. She thought that is what a marriage is, not the absence of fear, the capacity to say the true thing inside the fear. She looked at the winter garden. It was still January, there was still more winter to come, there always was. She picked up her book. She read. Spring came slowly that year. It was the kind of spring that didn't arrive all at once but came in pieces, a day of warmth followed by 2 days of cold, then 3 days of warmth, then cold again, so that the garden couldn't make up its mind and stayed tentative longer than usual. She found she liked this quality in the spring, the hesitation, the incremental decision. She was writing more by that spring. The piece that was not yet anything had grown to 40 pages and was starting to have a shape, though she could not quite name the shape. She wrote in the early mornings before Nikolai came down, which was the time the house was most quiet and the light was most honest, the pale, pre-decided light of early morning that doesn't favor or flatter anything. She liked writing in light that didn't flatter. Clara came to the house more regularly now. They had developed the kind of friendship that settled into its own rhythm, Tuesday afternoons, sometimes Thursdays. They talked about many things and had developed the kind of shorthand that required you to know someone well. Clara had, after their conversation in the winter, spoken to her husband about being told. She told Masha about it on a Thursday in April, in the sitting room with tea. He was embarrassed, Clara said. That he hadn't said it. That I had needed to ask. She paused. He said he had assumed I knew. I said one can know and still need to be told. Yes, Masha said. He said that now he understood the difference between those two things. Clara looked at her tea. He has told me since then, specifically, it is better. Yes, Masha said. It seems obvious, Clara said, when you're on the other side of having said it. But it required saying. Masha thought about the January conversation. She thought about I don't know your silence well enough yet. She thought about what it had cost her to say it, and what it had produced when she did. Yes, she said, it required saying. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, one of the tentative spring days was happening, warm enough to be promising, cautious enough to be honest. You've published 3 things, Clara said. 4, Masha said. The 4th was accepted last week. Clara looked at her with the expression of someone who is genuinely pleased for another person. What is it about? Cash flow timing in seasonal enterprises, Masha said. Clara laughed. How many people will understand it? Perhaps 50, Masha said. But those 50 will understand it very well. Good, Clara said, the right people. She walked Clara out later and stood at the gate watching her go down the street, and she thought about what Clara had said, the right people. She thought about the journal and its 300 or 400 readers and the 50 who would understand the cash flow article, and she thought about what it meant to have found the right people, not many people, not a famous readership, but the ones who were reading the same things and asking the same questions. She thought about Nikolai, who was the first right person she had found. She went back inside. That summer her parents came to visit for the first time. She had been back to the village twice, once in the first year and once in the second, but this was the first time they had come to Pskov, to the house. She had thought before they came about what it would feel like to have them inside this life she had built. She had thought about her mother in the library, about her father at the dinner table, about whether the house would look to them the way she had come to see it, or whether it would look like something else entirely. Her mother arrived and stood in the hallway and looked around with the expression Masha had seen her use when she was taking a precise reading of a situation. Then she said, "It's a good house." "Yes," Masha said. "It has a good feeling." Her mother was still looking around, like someone has been careful with it. "He has been careful with everything," Masha said. Her father arrived behind her mother and shook Nikolai's hand, and said something about the road and the weather, and was immediately taken to see the garden, where he spent a significant amount of time examining the soil along the fence, with an attention that Masha had never seen him bring to their own garden at home. He was asking questions about the drainage and the soil composition, and Nikolai was answering, and by the time they came back in for dinner her father and Nikolai were talking easily about practical things, the easy back and forth of 2 people who have found a common subject. She watched this from the kitchen doorway. She thought, my father is happier than he was 2 years ago. He is doing something specific with the land now, and it shows. It shows in the way he stands. Her mother found the library on the second day of the visit and stood in it for a long time looking at the shelves. Masha came in and stood beside her. "Your books are in here," her mother said. "Yes," Masha said, "mixed with his by subject." Her mother looked at the shelf nearest to her. She reached out and touched the spine of the Ostrovsky, the 3rd edition, in its place. "He sent you this," she said. "Yes, before the proposal." Her mother was quiet. She was looking at the books with an expression that Masha couldn't quite read. It was something complicated, something with several things in it at once, in the way her mother's expressions often were. "I want to tell you something," her mother said. Masha waited. "I was right about you, that you were remarkable." She paused. "I was wrong about what that meant. I thought it meant you would be a problem. I thought remarkable was a difficulty." She looked at the books. "But that's not what it means. Remarkable means the right person will find it remarkable." Masha looked at the shelves. "He finds it remarkable," her mother said. "Yes," Masha said. "I should have believed that was possible," her mother said. "I should have believed it from the beginning." Masha stood beside her mother in the library that she shared with Nikolai, with the books arranged by subject and her name now on 4 published pieces and 40 manuscript pages in her desk, and she thought about the blue dress and the instructions, and the plan to send a girl who looked forgettable to meet a man who would send her back. She thought about the version of events her family had planned and the version that had actually happened. She said, "You were wrong about the dress, and you were right that I was remarkable. Both of those things are true." She looked at her mother. "Both things." Her mother looked at her. She had the same look she'd had in the doorway of Masha's childhood room, all those months ago, controlled, and underneath the control something real. "Yes," she mother said, "both things." They stood in the library for another moment, side by side looking at the books. Then her mother said, "Show me the journal articles." Masha showed her. Her mother read them, actually read them, slowly and carefully, with the reading expression that Masha had not known she had, the expression of someone following something closely. She read all four, one after another, and when she was done she put them down on the small table and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are very clear." "Thank you," Masha said. "When you were small," her mother said, "you used to explain things to me with this same quality. You were perhaps 9. I would ask you about something you had read, and you would explain it so clearly that I understood it immediately, and it made me a little afraid." Masha looked at her. "I didn't know what to do with it," her mother said. "Something that clear in a girl that young, I didn't know where to put it." She paused. "I should have just let it be what it was." Masha said very gently, "Yes, you should have." Her mother nodded. She picked up her tea. They sat together in the library, her mother with her tea and Masha with her book, and the afternoon moved, and outside the summer was being generous, and the house was warm in the good way. Nikolai found them there an hour later. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of them, his wife and his mother-in-law, sitting in the library in the summer afternoon, and said nothing. He just came in and sat down and opened his book. They read, all three of them, for an hour. Her mother left on the 4th day. Her father shook Nikolai's hand for a long time and said something quiet that Masha couldn't hear, and Nikolai nodded and said something back. Her mother embraced Masha at the door, the kind of embrace that had years in it, complicated years, and forgiveness worked into the grain of it. "Come home in November," her mother said, "for a few days." "Yes," Masha said. She watched them go. She stood at the gate until the carriage was out of sight. Then she turned and went back into the house. Nikolai was in the hallway. "She approved," he said. "She read all 4 articles," Masha said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" She thought about it. She thought about the library and the blue dress and the 2 things that were both true. "Yes," she said, "I am." She went to the library. She sat at the small table. She opened her manuscript, the piece that was not yet anything, and she read the last page she had written. Then she turned to a new page. She wrote, "The years settled." She had been afraid for a long time of that word in any form, settled, settling, the settled life. She had heard it used as a kind of diminishment, a description of something that had stopped moving, stopped trying, stopped looking at the horizon. She had watched her sisters settle in her childhood's understanding of the word into lives that were adequate and quiet and not terrible, and she had felt, watching them, the particular sorrow of the person who can see the horizon from where others can't. She understood now that she had been partly wrong. Not wrong to want more. The horizon was real, and the things she had found at it were real. The library, the journal, the manuscript, the timber concerns accounts, and the estate records, and the particular life of a mind-given work that was equal to it. Those were real, but she had been wrong about settled, about what it meant. Settled was not the opposite of alive. Settled was what you could build when the energy that had been spent on fear got reassigned to something else. She was 26 by the time she understood this. She was 26, and she had been married for 5 years, and she was, by any measure, settled. And she was the most fully herself she had ever been. The manuscript that had not been anything was, by the spring of her 26th year, becoming something. It had grown to 120 pages and had acquired a shape that she could finally see. It was an account, but not of events. It was an account of the interior life of attention, what it meant to pay real attention to the things around you, and what it required of the person doing the paying. She had been writing it for 3 years without knowing what it was, and now she knew, and the knowing made the remaining pages easier to write. She showed it to Nikolai on an evening in April when the spring had finally decided to stay. She gave him the manuscript, the 120 pages in their folder, and she said, "You may read this." He looked at the folder, all of it. All of it. He read it over 3 evenings. She did not hover. She read her own books and went about the days and did not ask him anything about it while he was reading. She was capable of patience when she had decided to be patient, and she had decided. On the 4th evening, he put it on the table beside him and looked at her. "Well," she said. "It's true," he said. She waited. "I mean that as a specific thing," he said. "It's not just accurate, it's true in the way that things are true when the person who wrote them really believes them and has tested them against the actual experience." He paused. "There are 3 places where you're protecting yourself, where you come close to something real and then pull back." She looked at him. "Where?" He told her. He was specific. He named the pages and the ideas. She listened without arguing, which was not easy. She had written those pages and had felt the pull back as she did it, but had told herself it was the right degree of restraint. "You're right," she said. "You knew," he said. "Yes," she said, "I knew while I was writing it." She was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid of what was on the other side of pulling back." What was on the other side? She thought about it. She was going to find the precise version. "The parts of the experience that I haven't entirely made peace with," she said, "the parts that are still a little raw." He was quiet. "The blue dress," she said, "my mother's plan, the fact that I was brought to you as something forgettable and you weren't supposed to stay." She looked at the manuscript. "I can write around it. I have been writing around it, but it's there." "It should be in there," he said, "not around it." She looked at him. "The whole account needs it," he said. "The account of paying attention and being paid attention to. The thing that gives it weight is the fact that you weren't supposed to be paid attention to. That was the condition. That's what makes the attention remarkable." She was very still. He said, "It changed everything, and you're writing around it." She looked at the window. The April evening was going gold. She thought about the girl in the blue dress. She had thought about her many times, and she had written about her obliquely in the pages that addressed the question of being known. But she had not written the specific scene, the specific afternoon, the specific conversation. She had not written about being dressed to fail. "It would require naming what my family did," she said. "Not by name," he said. "But yes, the act." She was quiet. She thought about her mother reading the journal articles in the library, sitting in the summer afternoon with her tea. She thought about "You were never plain, not for a single day." She thought about the mother who had said, "I should have just let it be what it was." "They were trying to protect the family," she said. "Yes," he said, "and they dressed you to be rejected. Both things are true." She looked at him. It was the sentence she had said herself years ago, both things. He had learned it from her and was now giving it back to her. She said, "I know." "Write it," he said. She picked up the manuscript. She held it for a moment. "Write it," he said again gently. She went to the library. She wrote it. It took 4 days to write what had taken her years to approach. Not because it was long, the section was 12 pages, but because she had to find the version that was true and not cruel, that named the thing without punishing the people who had done it, that carried both truths at once. She wrote several versions of the opening and threw them away. She wrote a version that was too kind, and a version that was too hard, and a version that was too careful. Then she found the version that was simply accurate, the way the journal articles were accurate, the way she was when she was at her best, saying the true thing in the plainest possible terms. She wrote, "My family dressed me to be refused by the man they had found for me. They chose the worst dress and pulled my hair back without ornament and told me to keep my eyes down and not say anything of consequence. Their plan was to present something forgettable and let him send me home, because sending me home cost them nothing, and keeping me was a problem they could not see how to solve." Then she wrote, "I told him the conditions under which he was meeting me. I told him in the hallway of the front room with my parents gone for a moment to the kitchen. I told him because I could not think of any reason to do otherwise." Then she wrote, "He sent his carriage back to Pskov without him." She stopped there. She read it back. She thought, "This is the true thing, in the plainest possible language." She thought about the 12 pages that followed, the 5 days, the garden walks, the argument about Ostrovsky, the carriage going to the inn, the letter that came from Pskov and the letter she wrote back, the months of correspondence, the proposal in the front room, the green dress, the departure. She wrote it all, every piece of it. Not to make herself the heroine of the story. She was not a heroine. She was a person who had done the only thing she knew how to do, which was to pay attention and tell the truth. Not to condemn her family. They were people who had been in a difficult position and had made choices that had a logic to them, even the choices that had hurt. But to record what had actually happened, what the experience of being dressed to fail had been like from the inside, and what had come from the one true sentence she'd managed to say. She finished the section on the 4th day in the early morning. She sat back and looked at the 12 pages. She thought, "It is all there now, the full account." She took the 12 pages to Nikolai, who was eating breakfast. She put them on the table beside his plate. He read them while she made tea. When she turned around, he was looking at her. "Yes," he said, "that was all." She sat down. She poured the tea. Was it hard to write? He said. Yes, she said. Was it right to write? She thought about it. She thought about the full manuscript, the 132 pages it was now, the account that had its missing piece at last. Yes, she said. He nodded. He went back to his breakfast. She drank her tea and thought about the 12 pages and what they did to the account around them, how they made everything make sense, how they gave the whole thing a specific weight it hadn't had before. She had been writing around a center for 3 years, and the center was now there, and the account was whole. She was going to send it somewhere, not the Land Management Journal. This was not a journal article. She had a name from her correspondence with the journal editors, of a publisher in the city who printed books of a particular kind, non-fiction accounts that were personal and specific. She was going to write to that publisher. She finished her tea. I'm going to try to publish it, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. You've been working toward it for 3 years, he said. Of course you're going to try to publish it. She thought about the version of herself who had sat in the kitchen of her parents' house at 19 and known she was remarkable and not been able to prove it to anyone. She thought about all the years of knowing and not being believed. She thought about the letter to the publisher she was going to write, and about the fact that she had now, in addition to the manuscript, 4 published articles and a name that existed in the world. She thought the ground is solid now, different ground than before, but solid. She got up from the table. She went to the library. She sat at the small table with the window and the view of the garden, which was in its April beginning, tentative and real. She took out a piece of paper. She wrote to the publisher. The letter was not long. She described the manuscript in accurate terms, its subject, its structure, its approach. She said she had 4 published pieces in the Land Management Journal, and she named them. She said the manuscript was 132 pages and was complete and available for review. She signed it with her name. She sealed it. She walked to the post office herself in the April morning and posted it. Then she walked home through the streets of Pskov, which she knew now, the market and the river and the streets between, the neighbors she recognized and the quality of the light in the afternoon, and the sound the streets made at different hours. She walked through the city she had learned to live in, and she thought about the brown March garden of her childhood home, and the schoolteacher's books, and the first morning in Pskov when she had gone directly to find the library. She thought, I came here looking for the library, and everything else came with it. She walked home. She let herself in. Olga was in the kitchen, doing what Olga did in the kitchen, which was everything that needed to be done efficiently and without announcement. She looked at Masha as she came in and said, with the particular Olga economy of words, tea. Yes, Masha said, please. She sat at the kitchen table. Olga made tea. She set it in front of Masha and went back to her work. Masha held the glass. She looked at the kitchen, which was warm and familiar, the arrangement of things that she knew now so well she did not see them individually, but only as the assembled fact of the kitchen, the place where the mornings started and the evenings ended, and where the real conversations happened at the table. She thought, this is the life I chose. She thought, I chose it. It was not the life that was arranged for me. That life would have been a different house, a different kitchen, a different kind of quiet. I chose this one. I walked into it one sentence at a time. She drank her tea. In the hallway, the portrait was where it always was. She walked past it every day. Sometimes she looked at it and sometimes she didn't, and both were fine, and the portrait was just one more true thing in a house full of true things. She had stopped being afraid of it a long time ago. She had stopped being afraid of quite a lot of things. Not all of them. She was still afraid of January silences, still afraid of the cold inside herself, still afraid sometimes of the things she couldn't see coming. Fear did not leave. But it had become smaller relatively, because what was around it had become larger. The library and the accounts and the manuscript and the 4 published pieces and Clara on Tuesdays, and the garden in summer and Nikolai at the kitchen table on Tuesday mornings with the accounts. She finished her tea. She went back to work. The publisher wrote back in 6 weeks. The letter was cautious, the language of someone who was interested but wanted to be careful about being seen to be interested. It said that the manuscript was of possible interest, that the subject matter was unusual, that the approach was compelling. It asked if she would be willing to come to the city to discuss it. She read the letter twice. She set it on the table, she picked it up and read it again. She thought, they want to meet me, which means they think there is something there. She wrote back, she proposed a date, she went. The city was 3 hours by rail, which was itself an experience that she had had only a few times, the particular experience of speed that the train provided, which was different from carriage travel in the way that thinking fast was different from thinking slowly. She sat in the compartment with the manuscript in her bag and a book she was not reading, and she looked out the window at the countryside going past, and she thought about what she was going to say. She was going to say what she always said, which was the true thing. She was going to describe the manuscript accurately, without inflation and without unnecessary modesty. She was going to answer the questions they asked with the precision she brought to everything. And if they found that unnerving, which some people did, then they were probably not the right publisher for this particular book. The meeting was with a man named Frederick, who was the senior editor at the press, and a woman named Margaret, who she understood handled acquisitions. They were both in their 40s and they both had the quality she associated with people who read a great deal, a specific alertness in the eyes that came from spending most of your working life attending to other people's precise language. Frederick asked her about the manuscript, she described it. Margaret asked about the section on the blue dress, she had read it. She said, it is the most direct thing in the book. Yes, Masha said. Was that deliberate? Yes, she said, the rest of the book is about paying attention. That section is about the condition that made being paid attention to remarkable. If I had softened it, the account would lose its center. Margaret looked at her for a moment. It does not read as a grievance, she said. No, Masha said, it isn't one. My family were in a difficult position, they made choices. Some of those choices were wrong, I'm not angry about it anymore. She paused. But it needs to be in the book accurately or the book isn't true. Frederick said, the title. She had a title. She had had it for a year since the day she had written the blue dress section. She said it. They were quiet for a moment. Then Margaret said, yes, that's the title. She went home on the last train. She sat in the compartment and looked out at the dark countryside and thought about the meeting, about the two people who had read what she'd written and understood what it was for. She thought about the Land Management Journal and its 300 or 400 readers and the 50 who understood the cash flow article. She thought about the right people. These were the right people. The train moved through the dark. She did not read. She sat with the fact of the day, the manuscript in her bag, the meeting, the title, and she let it be a fact before she did anything else with it. She got home at 10. Nikolai was in the library. He looked up when she came in. She stood in the doorway. They want it, she said. He put his book down. He looked at her. They want to publish it, she said. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone who is receiving something large and wants to receive it properly. Good, he said. She came in and sat down. She was tired from the day and the train and the city, but underneath the tired was something she recognized as satisfaction, the real kind, the kind that comes from doing the thing you were trying to do and finding that it worked. Tell me about the meeting, he said. She told him about Frederick and Margaret and the questions they had asked and the answers she had given. She told him about the blue dress section and what Margaret had said. She told him about the title. He listened the way he always listened, fully, without interrupting, and with the particular quality of listening that involved actually thinking about what he was being told. When she finished, he said, the woman who asked about the blue dress, she understood what it was for. Yes, Masha said. And she didn't find it. She said it didn't read as a grievance, Masha said, which is what I intended. He was quiet. Good, he said again. They sat in the library for an hour. She was too tired to read and too settled to sleep. He sat beside her in the chair next to hers, not across the room, and was present without requiring anything of her. She thought this is what he has always been, present without requiring. She thought, I have spent 5 years learning to receive that. It took longer than I expected. It turned out to be the most important thing to learn. She thought about the manuscript and what it said, in all of its 132 pages, about receiving, about the particular labor of letting yourself be known by someone, and trusting that what they find will be acceptable, and the specific fear of that trust, and what comes on the other side of the fear. She thought, I have been writing about this the whole time. She looked at the books on the shelves, hers and his, mixed together by subject. She looked at the Ostrovsky third edition. She looked at the space on the shelf where the book she'd been looking for 2 years had been waiting when she arrived. "I want to thank you," she said. He looked at her. "For asking twice," she said. "In the front room that first afternoon, you asked what I was reading and my mother deflected and you asked again." She looked at him. "I have thought about that a great deal. If you had accepted the deflection, if you had let my mother's answer be the answer, I would have been quiet for the rest of the afternoon, and you might have sent the carriage home as planned." He was quiet. "You asked twice," she said, "and that was the whole of it. That was the thing that changed everything." He looked at her for a long time, then he said, "I asked because I wanted to know." "I know," she said. "It's that simple," he said. "I know," she said, "that is what the book is about." He thought about this. "You're going to put that in the acknowledgments," he said. She looked at him. "He asked twice," he said. "It belongs in there." She was going to say something, then she was not going to say something, then she said, "You always say the right thing." "I try to say the accurate thing," he said. "They're sometimes the same." She laughed. It surprised her. She hadn't known it was coming. He looked at her with the expression that had come before the smile on that first afternoon, the inside thing. He was smiling now. She had learned the smile and it still surprised her, the way good things do when you haven't been lazy about them. "Go to bed," he said gently. "It's been a long day." "Yes," she said. She got up. She went to the hallway and past the portrait and up the stairs. She went to bed in the room with the window and the garden below it, and she lay in the dark and thought about the manuscript and the publisher, and the woman named Margaret who had read the blue dress section and understood what it was for. She thought about the title. She thought about whether it was right. She decided it was. She fell asleep. In the morning the garden was doing its May thing, full now, genuinely full, past the tentativeness of April and into the real season. She looked at it from the window for a moment before going downstairs. She went to the library before breakfast. She sat at the small table. She took out the manuscript, the 132 pages, the thing she had been building for 3 years. She turned to the last page. She read the ending. She thought, "It is finished." She thought, "Everything after this is what comes next." She set the manuscript down. She looked at the garden through the window. The morning light was doing what morning light did in May, coming through the leaves at a low angle, illuminating the undersides of things, making everything look freshly arrived. She sat with this for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and turned to a new piece of paper, and she began to write the next thing. 31 years is a long time to pay attention to one person. It is not, if you are paying attention, a long time. This was one of the things she had written about in the manuscript, in the section about receiving, the paradox of sustained attention, which is that it compresses time. The years that she had spent with her attention genuinely engaged were the years that felt smallest in retrospect, not because they were empty but because she had been so inside them. The years before Peskov had a certain stretched quality in her memory, the 19 years of a childhood in a village in a back room with shelves, because she had spent much of that time looking at the horizon instead of at what was in front of her. The years after were different. She had been in them. 31 years of accounts and timber and estate records and published articles that eventually became published books. 3 of them by the time the century turned, each one a continuation of the question she had been asking since she was 19. What does it mean to really know something, and what does it cost to be really known? 31 years of a library that grew along its shelves until it needed a second room, and of 2 people whose books were mixed together beyond any ability to separate them, which was no longer a distinction that meant anything. 31 years of winter and February and the specific wait of some mornings, and of sitting in the library when the wait was there and reading aloud until it settled, and of the discovery that sitting still together in a room was one of the most reliable things they had. 31 years of Clara coming on Tuesdays, of the timber concern's annual cycle of difficulties and resolutions, of the mail that arrived from the village where her parents had grown old, and then the letters that told her they had died, her father in the 11th year, her mother in the 19th, and of the grief of those losses and the way grief sat alongside life and did not cancel it. 31 years of his hands. This was the thought that came to her the morning after he died, when she was sitting with him in the room before she called anyone. She was not a woman who allowed herself loose thoughts. She had always been disciplined about clarity, but she let herself have this one. his hands. She thought about his hands at the kitchen table, at the accounts, on the pages of books, gesturing once in a while when he was explaining something he found genuinely interesting. She thought about his hands, which had been the hands of someone who worked and was careful and did not waste motion. She thought about 31 years of those hands being somewhere in the same house as her. She sat with him for a long time. She thought about what needed to be done, and she made notes in her mind in the way she always made notes: specific, sequential, practical. There were people to notify and arrangements to make in the timber concern, which their son Edmund managed now but which would require her attention in the transition, and the estate accounts and the correspondence that needed to be dealt with. There were practical things to do, and she would do them. But first she sat. She was 61 years old. She had been in this house for 31 years. She had published 3 books and more articles than she remembered the count of without checking, and she had been invited to speak at a conference in the capital city twice, and she had met other people who read the same things and thought about the same questions, and Clara had been her friend for 30 years and was going to be devastated when she heard. She sat with all of this, the whole accumulation of the life, and she thought about the girl in the back room with the shelves, the one who had been reading about agricultural reform and making notes in the margin about what she disagreed with. She thought that girl had no idea. Not in a sad way. She meant it in the way you mean it when you understand that the person you used to be could not have predicted what they were moving toward, and that this was correct, because if you had known, you would have been afraid of it, and fear would have made you smaller, and you needed to be exactly the size you were. She had needed to be exactly the size she was. The room was quiet. The house was quiet. It was November, and the light was doing the particular thing November light did in Peace Cove, gray and serious and honest, the light that didn't flatter anything. She liked November light. She had always liked the light that didn't flatter. She had written about this somewhere. She thought it was in the second book. She looked at him. She thought, I want to say something. There is something to say that I have not said, or have not said in exactly the right way, and this is the last opportunity. She thought about this for a long time, and she discovered that she had said the right things. Over 31 years she had managed to say the right things, not every time, not perfectly, but enough that what was left between them was completed. There was no unfinished sentence. She was glad of this. She had been careful about it. She had learned early that things needed to be said, and she had done her best to say them, and he had done his best to say them, and they had built a life in which the important things were not left in the folders where she kept them privately but were said out loud. Thank you for asking twice. She had put it in the book as he had suggested. She had also said it to him more than once in the years since. He had always said, I asked because I wanted to know, it's that simple, and it was. The truth of it remained simple no matter how many times she returned to it. She got up. She straightened the blanket that was over him, carefully, out of habit, out of the 31 years of small habits. She went to the window and looked at the November garden for a moment. Then she went downstairs and made tea. Olga had been gone for years. She had retired in the 15th year and been replaced, in the practical way of these things, by a succession of capable people whose names she knew and whose work she valued, but with none of whom she had developed the specific understanding she had developed with Olga. The current housekeeper was a woman named Ruth, who was in her 30s and very efficient and kind, and who had not yet arrived for the morning. Masha made the tea herself. She sat at the kitchen table and drank it, and outside the November morning was doing what it did, and inside the house was exactly as it had been for 31 years. The kitchen, the hallway, the library, the stairs, the upstairs hall. The portrait in the upstairs hall. She thought about Vera. She had thought about her over the years as a person rather than a presence, a specific person who had died at 23, and who had been the kind of person who paid attention, and had found that out about Nikolai and had been found out by him in return. She thought about the particular sadness of that, of a life that had been entirely inside its beginning. She had never felt envious of Vera's place in Nikolai's history. What she had felt over time was something more like kinship, the kinship of two people who had both understood the same essential thing about the same man. She had never taken the portrait down. She thought sometimes about why she hadn't. The reasons were not complicated. The portrait was there because it was his. It was his to decide about, and he had decided to leave it. She had understood this when she arrived, and she had not changed her understanding. His grief was part of what he had brought to their life together, and his life together with her was part of what had made the grief something he could carry, and neither of these things cancelled the other. Both things, always both things at once. She finished her tea, she washed the glass. She went to the hallway, she got her coat. She was going to walk to Clara's house, which was not far, and tell her in person, because Clara was the kind of person you told in person. She passed the portrait. She stopped. She looked at it. She had looked at it countless times over 31 years, and had never done anything in particular about the looking. She looked at the young woman in the portrait, 23, attentive, the particular expression that the formality of the painting style had not quite been able to contain. She said quietly in the empty hallway, "He was good." It was not a thing she had planned to say. It came from somewhere accurate. She looked at the portrait for another moment, and then she turned and went out the door. The November city was grey and functional and exactly itself. She walked through streets she had known for 31 years, past the market and the buildings and the particular shape of the light on the river, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of thought, the kind that lets the mind rest while the body does what it knows how to do. Clara answered the door before she knocked. She had seen her coming from the window. She opened the door and looked at Masha's face, and she already knew. She had the look of someone who had already understood and was holding themselves together with effort. "Come in," she said. They sat in Clara's kitchen and Clara made tea, which was what you did, and they sat for a long time without saying much of anything useful. Clara cried. Masha found she was not crying, not yet. She thought she would later, probably alone in the library in the dark. But here she was not crying, she was simply sitting with her oldest friend in a warm kitchen and drinking tea and being present to the fact of the day, which was enough. "He was a good man," Clara said eventually. "Yes," Masha said. "He was good in the specific way," Clara said. "Not the general way that people say when they mean someone didn't cause problems." "No," Masha said, "not that way." They were quiet for a moment. "He asked twice," Clara said. She had read the book. She had read all 3 books. "Yes," Masha said. "That was the whole of it," Clara said. "That was the whole of it," Masha said. She walked home an hour later. She let herself in. She went through the hallway and up the stairs and past the portrait, and she went to the library. She sat at the small table by the window. The garden was there outside, the November garden, bare and honest, exactly itself. She looked at the shelves. She had been thinking, on the walk from Clara's, about something one of her grandchildren had asked her once. The youngest one, Edmund's daughter, a girl of 12 who had the same quality of sharp attention that Masha recognized and valued, she had asked, in the library looking up from a book she'd been reading, "Why do you have 2 copies of this one?" Masha had looked at the shelf. The 2 copies of the Ostrovsky 3rd edition, her original one from the early months, still in good condition, and a second one that Nikolai had eventually bought her as a replacement when the first one got worn from rereading. She had told the girl about the book and the footnote and the man who had sent it to her before they were married. She had not told the full story. The girl was 12, but she had told enough of it. The girl had listened with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested. Then she had said, "So the book started everything." Not quite, Masha had said. A question started everything. The book was what confirmed that the question was worth asking. The girl had thought about this for a moment. Then she had said, "That seems right." Masha had thought, "Yes, from a 12-year-old who reads the way I read. Yes, that seems right." She sat at the table now and looked at the shelf where the 2 Ostrovskys were, and she thought about the footnote, still quite small in both editions. And she thought about an afternoon in March, a long time ago, in a front room with a tea table and an old blue dress and a question asked twice. She thought about the answer. She had been telling herself something was not the real thing. She had been thinking all morning that she was not yet crying, that the grief was somewhere ahead of her in the dark of the library later. But sitting here at the table, looking at the 2 Ostrovskys and thinking about the afternoon in the front room, she found that the grief was here now, in the afternoon, in the light coming through the window and the garden being what it was. She sat with it. She had learned over 31 years that sitting with difficult things was not the same as suffering from them. You could sit with grief the way you sat with a difficult book, present to it, letting it do what it needed to do, not rushing it to its conclusion. She sat. After a while she picked up a piece of paper, She took her pen. She sat for a moment without writing anything. Then she wrote the first line of something she had not planned to write, something she had not known she was going to write until the pen was in her hand and the line was forming. She wrote, "The question was asked twice, which is how I know it was real." She stopped, she looked at the line. She thought about the whole of it, the 31 years and the letter from Pskov and the walk to Clara's house, and the portrait in the hall and the 2 Ostrovskys and the 3rd edition footnote, and the specific quality of attention that had been the real thing, the truest thing, the thing everything else had been built on. She thought about Edmund telling his daughter the story someday, the real story, when she was older. She thought about the girl with the sharp attention, listening the way she listened. She thought about what she wanted the girl to know, not the events were just events. The thing she wanted the girl to know was something about attention, about what it was worth, about what it made possible. She thought, I have written 3 books about this, and I am still not done with it. She thought, that is correct, that is right. She kept writing. Outside, the November garden was gray and serious and bare. Inside, the library was warm and quiet and full of books. In the upstairs hall, the portrait was where it had always been. The kitchen was where it had always been. The house was exactly the house it had been for 31 years, every room in its right place, every piece of the life where the life had arranged it. She wrote for 2 hours. When she stopped, she put the pages in her desk. She would read them tomorrow in the light that didn't flatter. She would find out what she had. She went to the kitchen and made dinner in the way she had made dinner on the evenings when Nikolai came home later than expected. She made what she would have made, the same food, the same amount. She set the table for one and sat down and ate her dinner. The kitchen was quiet. She looked at the empty chair across from her. She thought 31 years. She thought it was enough, it was more than enough. She thought I was not sent back. She had not been sent back, and the sending back had never been in question, and the carriage had gone to the inn and not to Pskov, and one question asked twice in a front room had become a life, a specific and real life, full of its difficulties and its winters and its grief and its library and its 2 Ostrovskys and its 4 published pieces and then 3 books, and then this new thing that was beginning in her desk, in her handwriting, which she did not yet have a title for but which would come. She finished her dinner. She washed the dishes. She turned off the kitchen lamp. She went through the hallway and up the stairs and past the portrait. Her hand touched the frame for a moment, briefly, a thing she had never done before and did not plan again, just this once, and she went to bed in the room with the window and the garden below it. She lay in the dark for a long time. She thought about the first night she had spent in this room, 21 years old and afraid and interested in everything. She thought about the library and finding the space on the shelf and the 3rd edition of the Ostrovsky, which had been exactly where it should be. She thought about the first morning, going downstairs to find him reading, and him putting the book away. She thought, are you all right? Not how did you sleep, are you all right? She closed her eyes. She was exactly all right. She fell asleep, and the November night did what November nights do, which is move slowly and without drama toward the eventual morning, the November morning that would come gray and honest and serious. And she would get up and make tea and go to the library, and she would open the desk drawer and take out what she had written yesterday, and she would read it in the light that didn't flatter, and she would see what she had. And then she would keep writing. She always kept writing. It was the only thing, next to paying attention, that she had ever found entirely equal to the life she was living.